I think we're about to start, and okay. All right, we're about to start. All right, now it's official. So, welcome everybody. Welcome to the Board of Behavioral Sciences Policy and Advocacy Committee. Today is August 2nd, 2019, and the time now is 9:02. We're at Sacramento, California. So I'll have Christina to help us establish a quorum.
Good morning. Christina Wong,
Here.
Deborah Brown. Here. Betty Conley.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So let's do introduction. So we'll start with our board member and staff. And so for the audience, if you're willing, please come up to the podium and introduce yourself and possibly the organization that you represent. So I'll start with Christy.
Christy Berger, Regulatory Analyst for the Board.
Roseanne Helms, Legislative Analyst for the Board.
Betty Conley, LEP member.
Deborah Brown, Public Member.
Sabina Knight, Legal Counsel.
Christine Wong, LCSW member.
Kim Madsen, Executive Officer.
Steve Sodergren, Assistant Executive Officer.
Thank you very much. And for the audience, it's not mandatory, it's voluntary. So feel free to come up.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW.
Jacob Fraker, NASW.
Good morning, Jan Lee Wong, NASW.
Good morning, Ann Tran Lin with CAMPT.
Good morning, Kenneth Edwards, California Association for LPCCs.
Good morning, Dr. Linthal, California Alliance of Child and Family Services.
Good morning, Gina Mertz from William Jessup University.
Thank you very much. So the next agenda item is to approve it's the April 5th, 2019 committee meeting minutes. And it's been sent to us, and there are copies, in the front. So any comments from the board members? No? Any public comments? Okay.
I'd like to make an amendment to the link on line 5, page 1 for the webcast link. That is an outdated link, so I'll make that change.
Okay. Thank you, Christina. So any other comments? Okay, so looks like we're ready for a motion.
I so move.
With the
with the approval of the board with the amendments proposed by Christina.
I'll second that. You want to second that? I'm good. You're good, okay. Christina Wong second. So any other discussion? Okay, I think we're ready to vote.
Christina Wong,
Yes.
Deborah Brown,
Yes.
Betty Conley.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. So, and then we're going to move on to the next discussion item, and that is regarding the practice setting definitions, subsequent registration numbers, and exam limits. And I believe it's Roseanne.
Yes.
So, take it away and see how. It is a pretty big discussion. So anytime you want to stop, go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So before I get started with this, I will say this is a giant discussion item, and when we were talking about it, we started with the discussion of the exempt setting definitions because we really need those, and that kind of morphs into changing that highlights some other changes other potential changes that may need to be made or we might want to make along the line. But I do want to say that right now, in terms of making a decision, it's really the practice setting definitions that we want to narrow down because we really need some definitions there. If we're not quite comfortable at the end of this discussion with the other things, I do have some sections set aside, and we could split this bill into two pieces so that the practice setting definitions could move ahead, and then the other ones could be continued to be discussed if that's how we feel. So we can just kind of play it by ear and see how it goes. But I'll get started. So the exempt setting committee, as I said, was formed to discuss a bunch of different issues we had seen related to our settings. One of those things that we're discussing now is clarifying practice setting definitions, because that was really identified as a critical need. so that our board and our stakeholders could have some clarity on what those are. So we started with that, and then that kind of morphs into, well, you can't work in a private practice with a second number. So do we want to do something with extending registration numbers possibly to 8 years with coursework required? So that proposal's in here too. And then when we were discussing that at the last meeting, it kind of came up that, well, if we're going to do that, then registrants really should have some continuing education. And we may possibly want to limit some of the exam attempts as well, sort of while we're revamping. So it's really a whole structural sort of change, but it can be done in pieces. So we're going to touch on all of those here today. But the first thing, and I'll stop after this item, is the clarifying of practice setting definitions. Currently, we have a proposal that kind of revamps that. Right now, there's really no definition of what a private practice is in our law. The law defines exempt settings pretty well, but nothing else. So this new proposal classifies all settings into two main types. There's the exempt settings and the non-exempt settings. The definition of exempt settings would remain the same, unchanged. Non-exempt settings are sort of in the everything else category. But then after discussion, the committee decided that they kind of wanted to carve out a couple of exceptions and place some further limitations on these. Two types of non-exempt settings are private practice and professional corporations. So we would kind of place some additional restrictions on those. The law change would reiterate that an individual working in an exempt setting who holds a board-issued license or registration is still under the jurisdiction of the board. And it also specifies that an active license or registration is required to provide psychotherapeutic services in any non-exempt setting, with a couple of exceptions. A trainee could provide services in any non-exempt setting as long as it's not a private practice or registered as a professional corporation, if they're under the jurisdiction of their school. And the same thing with 90-day, those following the 90-day rule would get the same thing. And that should really clear up some of the confusion about where trainees can work, pretty much anywhere but a private practice or a professional corporation. We're clarifying that an entity that is licensed or certified by a government agency, such as the Department of Public Health, is not automatically considered a private practice setting or an exempt setting. It depends on what its characteristics are. We've had confusion both ways on that. It proposes allowing supervisors in private practices or professional corporations to be allowed to have 6 supervisees instead of 3. And it also proposes, based on discussion at the last meeting, the possibility of allowing contracted supervisors to provide services as a private practice or professional corporation. We'll discuss that more in a minute. And then finally, it prohibits any licensee who owns any type of business utilizing a fictitious business name from using a false or misleading name of the business. Previously, it was only specified for a private practice. So there's about 5 specific items I want to point out for discussion, and then we can either stop after. Probably should stop after these individually. So I'll go over them, and then we can discuss anything else about this too. I wanted to specify a change that was discussed at the last meeting, the definition of exempt setting. Currently, the law specifies that certain settings are exempt settings if the employer volunteer is supervised solely by the entity where he or she is working. However, we believe that language is a little outdated. We allow with a written agreement, we allow third-party supervision in these settings. And a lot of times the exempt settings don't have the resources to provide supervision, so they need to contract out the supervisor. So the exempt setting committee recommended revising the language at its last meeting to state that a setting is exempt if the employee or volunteer's work is performed under the oversight and direction of one of the specified exempt settings. I mean, you can find that language in the packet on page 11, about in the middle of the page under subdivision C. this chapter should not apply to any employee or volunteer working in any of the following settings if his or her work is performed under the oversight and direction of one of the following: government entity, school, college, etc. So wanted to point out that change and make sure everybody felt comfortable with it.
Board members, any question, discussion? I like that clarification. I think that is a lot cleaner, and actually, when we specify the oversight and direction, I think that's really where the associate and the trainee, that needs to go. So, yeah.
Okay.
Any public? Any comments? Very comfortable with the language. Great. That's awesome. So let's move on.
All right. So the next item for discussion is entities licensed or certified by a government entity. When we're talking about private practice, the committee wanted to specify that an entity licensed or certified by a government entity should not be considered a private practice. This is because they felt that one of those certifications provides an additional level of oversight. So there's not the same concern about it going unchecked as there is a private practice. However, when we were looking at the language after the meeting as it had been decided on, we had a concern that it could be a little bit too vague and might need some tweaking. For example, we thought maybe it could be construed to mean that any entity holding a city-issued business license, which is technically a government entity, is not a private practice. So we wanted to suggest alternative language, and that can be found on page 12. It's at the top of the page under subdivision B. You see an A and B there. And right now it says an entity that is licensed or certified by a government agency to provide psychotherapeutic services shall not be considered an exempt setting unless it, oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong place. That's another kind of where the definition ties in, but it's down on item number 4. An entity that is licensed or certified by a government agency shall not be considered to be a private practice setting. So that could be, technically, somebody could try to argue that that's a business license too, like a city, and everybody has to have that. So we thought maybe we could say an entity that is licensed or certified by a state or federal agency to provide healthcare services shall not be considered a private practice setting. When we looked, it looks like the Department of Public Health, and there's several state agencies, there's some federal agencies that provide these, weren't sure about it at a county level, if that should be included. But we thought that it looks like to us that the state or federal agency pretty much covered everything. So wanted to discuss how everybody felt about that.
Board members? Betty, you were thinking.
Yeah, I am thinking. You can hear the wheels grinding. I am a little concerned about omitting counties. I think there may be county entities that may need to be included in that. I don't know. I think it's something to be.
So isn't county also considered government?
Yeah, but so is a city that issues a business license too, which is where our concern is stemming from.
Okay.
So if we just leave it state and federal, then would an unintended consequence be that we don't recognize county behavioral health settings?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would be Christina, your facility's county, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's registered by the state.
But it's also registered by the
Also
state.
registered by the state.
Oh, yeah.
So
that might, if all county entities are also registered by the state, then that wouldn't.
That's what it looked like from my research, but I'm not an expert on how counties regulate things. And so, yeah.
And
yeah,
I'm
because
not
it's all under Department of DHCS, so
Healthcare services.
Healthcare services, so I don't think any of those
Would be
provide mental
excluded?
health, would be
Okay,
it would be sufficient.
all right.
It almost seems to reason that if they're registered under healthcare services, that's where they need to be able to deliver Medi-Cal services.
Yes.
So,
Yes, absolutely.
okay.
Actually, my feedback is, healthcare may be a little bit broader So if would that be more appropriate to do it mental health instead? Because healthcare can means, public health, can means, environmental health. So different type of health. So Christy.
But don't also healthcare entities also provide mental health or behavioral health services?
Behavioral health is basically is the combination of the substance use disorder services and the mental health, and that's behavioral health.
But don't healthcare providers also provide those?
Yeah, which is why I left it at healthcare services. I didn't say mental health because
That would be more limiting.
that would be more limiting in case there were any kind of unique circumstances.
And the certifications that are issued are not necessarily mental health. It might be, it's a,
behavioral health.
yeah.
Or human and health services, right? Okay. All right.
So are we comfortable with the state and federal agency to provide healthcare services?
Yep. Public comments?
No. We got around that.
Hi, Ann with CAMT. We really like the clarifying language. I think healthcare services is broad enough. You have some alcohol and drug substance abuse counseling centers that do provide psychotherapy services. Also, I believe the law requires that these settings be a place where the associate or trainee regularly provides counseling services. So I think that takes care of Christina's concerns. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Lynn Thal from California Alliance of Child and Family Services. Just for clarity for you, through the California waiver with CMS, the federal organization that covers healthcare for Medicaid and Medi-Cal, they subcontract with the counties. And so the counties are the entities who are charged with ensuring that the specialty mental health services are provided to beneficiaries who are eligible for them. And so our members actually subcontract with the subcontractor of the states. So we would be a little concerned if counties are not included in that, since they're the ones who get to make the determination and certify our members as Medi-Cal organizations. Thank you.
Rebecca Gonzalez, NASW. I was concerned that this might not include CPS.
Is
Child Protective Services?
Sorry, Child Protective Services.
Okay.
that's state, isn't it?
No, it's on a county level.
It is a county level, yeah, it's administered at the county level.
But they wouldn't need to be certified because they're an exempt setting, right? They're already in an exempt setting. So we're talking about something that maybe right now we'd think of it as a private practice.
Okay.
But now it's certified by whoever, and now you're not a private practice. So exempt settings aren't affected by this, right?
Okay.
Hi, so just to clarify, county DMH, for example, would that fall under the exempt setting, governmental entity?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be exempt itself.
Thank you.
So the feedback from the stakeholder is that, we should probably add county, just because, they also do the certification for the contractors. So, and then that becomes like, whether those contractors, will become, the contractors basically normally are the nonprofit organizations. Yeah. And so the nonprofit organizations will fall into the
exempt.
exempt.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that definition is not going to affect them because they're already in an exempt setting.
Right.
Okay.
So my question then is that, maybe, whether we should actually add the county, so that we can specify, the situation that, that if they are the county contractors, then whether, that would be also covered, and just add that clarification and take care of, Betty's also concern, for the smaller county. So we basically the language will just add another word, county
County,
state or federal agency.
Because counties don't provide business licenses, correct? It's cities, right?
Counties do, but I still think we're okay because we're saying to provide healthcare services. So as long, I think
Okay.
as long as that wording's there, we're okay.
So there's a good chance that they might be, the city will be providing the business license, and yet by nature, those contractors by the counties, then we can cover, and make sure that they are.
They're
the
covered,
exempt
so,
license. Yeah.
so they're not considered, they would be considered in a non-exempt setting,
Yes.
but they would not be considered a private practice.
Exactly.
So trainee could work there and.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So we would do, say, an entity that is licensed or certified by a county, state, or federal agency to provide
Yes.
healthcare services.
Yes.
Is not a private practice.
Right. Jan Lee?
Janley Wong, NASW. Perhaps this requires additional thought. For example, in family court or juvenile dependency court or juvenile delinquency court, it is quite frequent that they mandate therapy for their wards. And so when they mandate therapy, sometimes they go to private practitioners who are on a court list rather than hire mental health professionals to provide that service. So you want to carefully not say these are private practice people because they're actually assigned by the court or ordered by the court or approved by the court to provide these services, but it's in a private practice. There's no little office in the courtroom where they go to. They usually go to the practitioner's private practice office. So that, we don't want to create a complicated and unintended consequence situation here.
I guess my question would be, is there ever a situation where an entity might be certified or licensed through the county where that entity would not be considered an exempt setting?
Yeah, they might issue some kind of license, or they might contract with the county to provide services somehow. And they're not a government entity.
Right.
But they're not a private practice either. So I think we're okay there, but with Jan Lee's point, that's a good point. But I guess my question is, that they're mandated by the court's mandating, okay, you need to see this private practice therapist. Is that the same thing as licensed or certified by the court?
Well, I know that there's steps that they have to go through to get on that list, to qualify as an entity, an individual to provide services. That I know. So would we view that as a contract? Someone contracting with the court? And then essentially, so if they're contracted with the court, then
I don't
Yeah.
I don't know.
It doesn't say contracted. So
Right.
they would still be a private practitioner.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility, but the mandated service is a mandate, it's a mandating. So I think it's separate from where and who, and how they get the services. So, so they can, oftentimes, when they are mandated by the court, they might, be able to go to a private practitioner. They might be able to go for the county services. And so, so what really those people who need to be looking for is whether that therapist is licensed with, is eligible to provide that services. So I think it's a little bit different than the setting that we're talking about. So, but I think it's a very good point because, since this is so new, so there might be holes that, that we're not really looking for.
And that's what we're trying to figure out.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure
We
out.
would
But I'm thinking for that particular scenario, I think the chance that, we will prevent people from getting services from the mandated setting, I think it's rare. Because, truly, a lot of those court mandated people, they can go into private practice. And once they have a certification saying that I attended, so many of them, I think that will be just fine.
Yeah. Well, they would still be, I just want to clarify that a court, somebody was mandated by the court, that's still a private practitioner, so they would
Yes,
still be
they
considered a
could
private
be a
practice.
private practitioner, and they could be, a government entity, and that's where,
That's true.
what I'm
Right.
thinking. And they could be, one of those nonprofit organization. So I
Mm-hmm.
think I'm oftentimes my experience is I don't think court will say that you have to go to this particular person. They don't make referrals. They don't make recommendation. They have a list of people. So from the consumer's point of view, that they do have choices, where they would go for. And so the most important thing is really about like finding a therapist that is eligible to provide a service to fulfill the mandate, from the court. But not the setting issue. But it's a really good point to keep in mind. So
this brought up a different thought for me. I know in shortage areas, are counties contracting with any private practitioners to provide services? Does that happen in like very rural areas? So what I'm thinking is maybe if that's not our intent, is maybe we clarify, it says an entity that is licensed or certified. Maybe we clarify that it does not mean an individual licensee. We do say entity, and maybe that's clear enough. But if we say this, an entity
Or a business.
or a business, maybe, well,
Somebody could have their own business, though.
yeah. So I think maybe where we're drawing a line is we don't want, somebody who's put up a shingle, an individual to fall into this. And so, anyway, food for thought.
But contracted isn't the same as licensed or certified. This is somebody, we're thinking, I mean, what the intent is something like public health or DHCS is, okay, the agency XYZ, you are now authorized to act as this type of an agency and provide these services.
Right, and I don't think a contract is the same as certifying or licensing.
yeah,
They're just contracting or
contracting.
hiring them.
yeah.
Good morning, Laura Polly with Adult Parole, CDCR. My question brings up that contracting is not the same as certifying. We also have the California Sex Offender Management Board, which certifies agencies or private and organizations to provide sex offense treatment to PC 290 individuals. However, the Division of Adult Parole contracts with private entities to provide these services, and then probation as well doesn't necessarily contract, but they are required to attend treatment. So we've run into an interesting issue where we need to figure out how to assign them as private or exempt and for our own certification purposes. So as of right now, that's why we're here to gather information on what that might mean. So thank you.
So if they are contracted to provide services,
Through an entity that,
yeah, it would still be a private practice. They're not certifying the organization to provide healthcare services in general. It's just, we're going to have a contract with you and we're going to send our people to your way. Is that correct? So that could still be a private practice. It could be an exempt setting too, but it's not placing the limits on that.
Right.
It's not narrowing it.
It's not, yeah.
okay.
It's really about like which pieces fall into which category.
Right.
So,
And it could be that if this runs and, there might be a situation that comes up and we have to come back and correct
Yes.
something because
right.
there's, could be something out there that we're not aware of. So that is
Well,
possible.
we still have the board meeting, so,
Yeah.
so we can actually, now this is really great. So I think, we can probably, I feel like that, we can probably move forward with it, when we, and then, at the board meetings, and I'm sure that there's another chance that, we can have public comments and,
Yeah, we have 2 more board meetings and 1 more P&A meeting,
right.
so.
So we can
flush it out.
continue to tighten it up. Yeah, but great comments, so thank you.
Do we want to add county? Was
Do we
that the
wanna add
consensus
county?
of the board?
I
Yes.
think we were adding
I
county.
think adding
Correct.
county, yes.
I have it in my notes to add, so, okay.
Good, wonderful, yep. Okay, thank you, Roseanne. Oh,
Janley Wong, NASW, speaking for an example of the city of Berkeley. Some of you may know that even though the city of Berkeley is in Alameda County, mental health services in the city of Berkeley is provided by the city. So if you're talking about adding county, that might exclude the city of Berkeley.
Why don't you use the word local? What about?
Yeah, local would work.
Because that local will capture county and city.
That goes back, I think, to our original concern, though, because counties issue business licenses. And so, I mean, we could just say certified by a government agency
Yeah.
to provide healthcare services. I mean, it says to provide healthcare services. Would that include a business license? I don't know. If the cities are in there, it's a little bit more iffy to me.
Right. But like you said, if you take the word just government,
Yeah.
And then replace it with states and
Yeah.
or federal agency. So it means that it will be an entity that is licensed or certified by
a government.
a government agency to provide healthcare services.
You want to do that?
You know, because the healthcare services already, you know, add a layer of the specification, you know, for the government agency. And then the government agency kind of like, and you know, embrace all the level that we're thinking about.
Does it, when we have it that broad, my only concern is somebody could argue that a business licenses them to provide healthcare services, even though it's not specifically healthcare services.
Right.
Could we add language that says this is not to be construed to include a business license?
Right.
Yeah.
Or a section that says a business license is not a certification?
Well, it's a license.
Yeah.
Or
Then they can say
along
it's
those lines,
It's a license.
or maybe along those lines, you say a license that is not, maybe there's some way to say a license that is not specific to providing healthcare services shall not qualify here, but that we'd have to work on that
You
language.
could say, or an entity that is required to be, well, no, that's not going to work either.
Well, go ahead.
And perhaps I'm wrong on this, but cities typically, when they give a business license, aren't in the business of checking out whether or not you say you're a business and you're going to sell hubcaps. They're not going to come around and actually see if you're doing something beyond hubcaps. We've talked before at the last meeting about as long as your name is part of it, that's another whole belt. You know, being a part of a city, we weren't engaged in what the business is doing. The business license is operating a business in the city, and that's what it covers. No one's going out to see if you're providing the health services you claim you're doing. They would assume that that was being taken care of by someone else. So I think and then it's further complicated. You have 2 or 3 out there in the state of California that's county and city are the same. And so then, where does it begin and where does it end? So I think we need to be real careful about that. But I would just generally say that cities are not in the business of trying to figure out whether or not you're actually providing a health service. And no one's going to come to your door or your place of business to check you out. That would be they would say that's the consumer's issue, and that's the board that issues the licenses, and it's the consumer and the licensee, which would be the state. That would be their business, not whether or not I have a business license in the city to operate. I think those are 2 different things.
Right. I think we could also argue if someone wanted to claim that a business license qualifies under what we're proposing, you could talk about how the other state and federal agencies are actually certifying and providing oversight over the activities that are being conducted at that level. And that would exclude a business license. So I think we could make that argument if someone wanted to push back on it.
What if we said, or an entity that is licensed or that is, maybe say an entity that is overseen and licensed or certified by a government agency? Does that help any?
I don't think.
Or certified.
I mean, isn't that when you have a certification and license, aren't you overseen by them anyway? That's kind of, I don't know if that's really adding much. And isn't you're kind of like, if you're not fall into that realm, you're illegally practicing whatever you're supposed to be doing. So I don't know. I think government entity, or like we were saying, either like a government, state, local, that would be fine with the caveat on there, the healthcare services. I mean, that's.
Okay, we can
mean-
go with that. And if for some reason we, have a lot of pushback on it, we can always amend it later.
Right.
Hi, Ann Tran with CAMPT. Just a suggestion, how about state or federal regulatory agency? I think that brings
government.
it to just or government regulatory agency. And
Yeah.
that's just instead of county or, we're not thinking about business license. I think that's just a suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, government.
Government regulatory agency. I like that.
perfect.
That way you get
I
rid
like
of
that.
county,
Yes.
state, and federal.
Yeah.
So that will read, yeah, no, that's a really, really good idea, because I think the regulatory is really about that oversight and, yes, it's definitely not.
Right,
yes.
right.
And that will cover all those contractor, of the contractor and the subcontractor, because really what we want is the oversight, is the regulatory component.
Yep.
So that is a brilliant idea. So now in that sense, Roseanne, do you have the language?
Yes, it would be an entity that is licensed or certified by a government regulatory agency to provide healthcare services shall not be considered a private practice setting.
Nice. So any other discussion? I feel a sense of happiness and success,
Happy thought.
very
Yeah.
good.
We're always
Satisfaction, that's the word I'm looking for.
We're always better together. I
Yes,
love it.
absolutely. Okay, awesome. So
right.
let's move
Can
on.
we move on?
Yeah.
Perfect. Allowing contract supervisors in private practice. So this was brought up at the last meeting. Current law requires supervisors in a private practice to practice at the same site as their supervisee or be an owner of the private practice. And then if it's a professional corporation, the supervisor has to be employed full-time there and be, quote, actively engaged in providing professional services there. So this leads to a lot of confusion, especially for corporations. What is actively engaged in providing professional services there? Do they have to just see clients? Can they just be doing case notes or overseeing supervisee? What does that mean? Can a supervisor work for a corporation that has multiple sites and be bouncing around from one site to the other? We get those kinds of questions. So we need to clarify that. In an effort to clear up the confusion, the committee discussed rewording the section, and part of it included kind of a curveball of what if we allowed contract supervisors in a private practice or professional corporation. And the reasoning for that was that the thought that the upcoming supervision regulations, which are running right now, will hold supervisors to a higher standard. There's a lot more things that they need to fill out, things that training they need to have, things like that. However, upon regrouping after the meeting and kind of discussing a little further, I wanted to discuss possible unintended consequences of allowing contract supervision. Could it allow a small private practice to have too many supervisors that are contracted out and associates being exploited? One possible solution to that is if we wanted to allow contract supervisors, only allow a certain percentage of the entity's total supervisors to be contractors, like 10%, 25%, whatever. The committee should discuss whether requiring supervisors, or the committee should also discuss whether requiring supervisors to provide psychotherapeutic services at the same site provides sufficient clarity, and I have the wording there too. But I think that this just needs some more discussion on if we want to allow that or if it could, especially in the conjunction with allowing 6 per supervisee that's also proposed. I could potentially envision a situation where you have a small private practice that is just having contracting out a large number of supervisors.
Discussion, board members? No? So my question is that, because I look at the page 19, of your packet. So it looks like if it's allowing the contractor, then they also will need to provide psychotherapy to the clients at the same site.
Yes.
So in that sense, then what will be the difference between a full-time person and a contractor? Because it will just basically, kind of the difference will be the one is, will be providing a 1099 form and the other person will be getting a W-2 form. Maybe a part-time and a full-time. I mean,
But they don't have to work there full-time. They could just be seeing one client there, but they have to have some stake in it, basically, other than just being a supervisor. That's kind of the point of that.
so, so they can, in a scenario that they can probably just see one client and then supervise, instead of being a full-time job.
They could.
And then they can actually be basically the independent contractor, and they don't have to be like a full-time person. But then they have to see the client there also.
Right.
Right, their job then becomes a professional supervisor, for
Right.
lack of definition.
Right.
This is really, Roseanne, jump in here if I'm misrepresenting this, but this is really sort of the issue that we're having with a number of entities right now, Kaiser, DaVita, because because of the full-time on-site requirement, and when you think about the volume or how large a Kaiser is, and they have multiple, you have one campus and you have multiple sites, but they're all under one heading, and they could be a corporation classified this way. There's 3 different ways they can be classified, so what applies to them? And if I'm a Kaiser employee and I'm supervising, can I supervise at, building number A and B, but I'm also working in building number C, and honestly, it was making our heads spin.
Oh, yeah, no, I understand, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
so that's, so that's sort of the background
Right.
of where we're, the proposal.
Yeah. Betty?
So when I think back to the conversations that we had in the exempt committee and kind of the concerns that were brought up both by stakeholders and people on the committee, I mean, there were a couple of things. Obviously, we want people who are associates to get, or associate level, to get adequate supervision, to get good supervision, to have a supervisor that's available to them and accessible to them. And that, I think, was part of the rationale for having them be on site, is that they be accessible. And that if there was a crisis, there would be someone on site to provide that. And I'm not coming up with an answer here. I'm just kind of illuminating the challenge. But then the flip side to that is it's also a barrier to people who are trying to find positions, and the challenge of the supervision requirements to align with what they could provide in an otherwise suitable location. So I don't have an answer, but I think anything that we come to needs to make sure that we're not limiting options for both our associates and our agencies that are going to be providing a good environment for them, but at the same time ensuring some of that safety. So,
Yes. Yes.
I think one of the other important things that was brought up at the last exempt meeting, which I just like to say off the top was probably the most productive meeting. I've been on this board now for 7 years, and that was the most good job. That was the most amazing subcommittee that I've been to. That was, thank you so much for your input. It's too bad you weren't there. I know you were at another meeting, but it was so productive, and we made so many important decisions. And I think one of the things that when you were talking about the supervision, and to back up what you just said, was the lack of supervisors and people being reluctant to being supervisors, and how the supervisors out there are mostly the baby boomers, and they're all starting to rotate out. And we don't seem to have this huge crop of new supervisors that are ready to come on board. And so there might be, I think that was one of the other concerns. We seem to be in this little window here before the new group comes in, and you've got the large group starting to exit quickly. So I think that was something we need to, at least in this time and space, to take under consideration, and something that was brought up last time.
I think I think the lack, okay, put it this way, so the current licensee's requirement, in order to be a supervisor, you just have to license for 2 years. And then take all these classes and stuff like that, the 6 units or whatever, the supervision class. So, I think it's about the unwillingness to step into, the clinical supervisor role more so than the unavailability. So I think I need to, I think I need to clarify it because really, the licensees, if they fulfill that requirement, and then there's another requirement about the practicing, you'd have to practice 2 years out of the 5 years. And so, it's not a very difficult requirement to meet. And yet I think a lot of the people hesitant to do it. It's because of the level of the responsibility and the possible liability, when the associates get into issues. And so I think that is a very different discussion versus, the availability versus the unwillingness to jump into the field. And so, so I just want to clarify that, by my point of view. And we're actually making, the supervisor requirement even more stringent, if all the law pass. And so, so I am thinking that now that's actually interesting. So for one, we want to encourage them to, to be the supervisor, and yet we're also tightening up your responsibility. So, so where does it go, right? And so it's that added, requirement, for the supervisor are actually going to, to create another scenario that, more people are unwilling because of the possible liability that they see.
Well, I think the point that you make about the increased supervision is a good one, and I think that's why during the discussion at the exempt committee meeting, there was a comfort level in suggesting that why not let them contract with a supervisor because of the increased requirements and responsibility. So from my perspective, I'm comfortable because my guess is that some of the supervisors that would actually do this are going to be responsible supervisors, and that's the people we want them. We want those supervisors training the associates so that for independent practice later on. There are supervisors out there now that just sign whatever, however, doesn't matter. They don't meet with the associates. And that's a challenge because those folks are having trouble with the clinical part of the exam because they're not getting that quality supervision. So, the way we're doing it now kind of makes it difficult and maybe creates somewhat of a barrier. And it was created back in a time where, you had the government entity where you got your services versus the private practice. And we've evolved now where the practice settings are a little bit different.
So I'm wondering, because, to me, the word contract, it really started to step into the tax law. And so, and current language is really talking about full-time. So what about, when we talked about part-time or full-time, basically just take out, employed for the corporation. And so then you can open up, employed or contracted for the corporation, so you take out that, I don't know.
We took that out, I thought.
We took out full-time. It says, so the new language
The
would be-
full-time already,
yeah,
and that's where the contracting come from, because under the assumption.
employed or contracted.
Yeah, under the assumption that, that they might be doing the part-time, and yet you can also have a contractor who do a full-time job.
Right.
And so, so yeah. And
It's a
so
labor thing.
that's a labor thing. That's why I'm thinking that, when you allowing the contractor, then, yeah, okay.
Yeah, the contracted, it comes from, right now, we require somebody to be, for an associate, they have to be, our associates they can only be employees, they can't be independent contractors. So this is coming from kind of that concept is if you're an employee, you're getting a W-2. If you're a contractor, you're getting a 1099.
Right.
You don't work for the agency, they're bringing you in. So I think that that's okay.
That's fine, yeah, that's fine. I'm just bringing it, just to,
Right.
again,
No, it's a good
just
point.
some of the points to food for thought, yeah. Betty?
So I think I'm going to go back and revise my first statement in that I think I felt pretty comfortable at the end of the exempt committee meeting that we had reached a somewhat good compromise. There's the question of, is there a possibility of exploitation? I think that's in order to absolutely protect against the possibility that that could happen. I'm afraid that we would be creating additional barriers that are exactly what we're trying to get away from. And I really felt like at the end of the exempt committee, after we had really worked this through, that with the additional supervisory requirements, with the additional scrutiny on supervisors, I don't think we'll ever, we're not going to be able to address the issue that you brought up of people just not wanting to supervise. Right. That's beyond our control. But what we can do is minimize barriers. Right. And I really felt like the effort that we made at the exempt committee, while there's always the potential for some abuse, I mean, that's the case in any system. And if you make it so that there is absolutely no abuse, then you've created so many barriers that it's hurting 98% of the people or 99% of the people. So I'm going to stand on, I feel pretty good with where we were at the end of the exempt committee, and I think it's good enough. I don't know if that's a good, I mean, I think it protects the consumer. I think it also affords a somewhat more of a, I don't know if it's an incentive, but certainly less of a barrier to supervisors and to entities, and continues to create opportunity for our associates.
No, I'm good. I'm just, bringing up, some of the clarifications. So, I mean, it's, actually what comes in my mind is that when you start a contract, with, for the supervisor, the exploitation may not actually happen with the associates. It may be with the supervisor because of, they won't actually have benefits, and yet they're having that full-time, or maybe like a pretty full of responsibility. Yeah.
Although the state's working on a bill that's going to have some stuff to say about who can be an independent contractor versus an employee. So that's getting tightened up as well, kind of separately from us. Right. So good. They're going to have to consider all of the laws as a whole when deciding if they're going to do this.
Well, thanks for bearing with my food for thought. So any public comments?
Kenneth Edwards, California Association for LPCCs. I agree with the comments that with more, the requirements are great. We can increase requirements, that's fine. But what we've heard from a lot of associates and supervisors is that they're okay with the responsibility, they're okay with the number of years, they're okay with the courses. It's all of the other pieces that are attached to it that I think that's sort of shrinking the population of supervisors. And they're completely okay with being responsible for somebody else. It's just, if I have to do 10 other hoops to get there, I'm just not going to do it. It's not worth it. They're not getting any extra money. They're not getting any extra benefit from it. So we just wanted to throw that in there. Yep. Thank you.
I know.
So we need to continue to tackle, how to attract the licensees to become supervisor, right? Whether it's through, I'm actually hoping that, this, by having the, being the contractor, it's hopefully, that will attract more people, to be able to feel like that, they can earn some extra money, because of this reason and stay in the field, and feeling that, they can actually train the next generation and be able to give back. So, any other comments?
So I want to ask before I throw one more tiny curveball.
Okay.
So are we okay with the language as it's written there? Do we feel that that's fair, requiring them to provide services to clients at the same site?
And that's page 19, correct?
Page 19, sorry. Mm-hmm. Yes.
19 to 20.
If we're okay with that, then I want to throw in one more point. Right now, if you look at the language that's being struck out, we basically say for private practice that you have to provide services there, or you can be an owner. So we don't currently require owners to see clients at the same site if they own it. Does that disenfranchise anyone? Is there an unintended consequence there by saying that you have to provide, if you're an owner, you have to provide services? And do we want to exempt owners from that number 2? Or do we think that they should be doing that too?
So we're talking about private practice or professional corporation.
Yeah, page 19 at the bottom of the page. Yeah.
I would, for my taste, yes, I would keep owner. And the reason I would keep owner is that I keep going back to that one, the one case, actually it's been 2 now, where we've had a single owner of a private practice let the associate deliver services at that locale, said that they were there, but they weren't. The owner was actually in Southern California and the private practice was in Northern California.
So you want to leave it in?
I'm
like that?
thinking that they need to be there.
Okay.
At least
So they need to be there,
once.
there and seeing clients.
I would think, otherwise you've got an associate running a business with no oversight.
Okay.
I don't know if anyone else has that thought, but it just, yeah.
Any public comments? Seemingly minor, but really it's a big impact because it means that, you cannot have, run the private practice, you cannot have different sites. You have to physically be there.
Well, you don't have to always,
you don't have
there's
to
other
always be
requirements you
there.
have to be on site or have
Right, you have to be
arrangements, but
on site.
You have to be seeing clients.
Right, so the owner needs to see clients.
But I'd rather fix it now than when it's a law. So if it's a problem, that's why I wanted to bring it up.
So we would have to change that language.
No, we're
it
thinking
just
of
stays
not,
the way
yeah.
it is.
Turning it off, is employed by or contracted by the associate, or is an owner.
And, but so it reads that way, but then it says, and you have to provide psychotherapy.
And provide therapeutic services
at
clients
the
at the
same
same site.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
I
we're-
got it. Okay.
Before the language didn't make
So
the
the
owners do that
and.
extra step.
So the and is where
That's where
that's the addition. Okay, all right. Yeah, I got it now.
Hi, Ann Tran with CAMP. So just to clarify, this would then allow, this would, if you had an owner of a professional corporation and they had multiple sites, multiple offices, would that require the owner to be working at the other sites?
If they were supervising
They were
somebody
the
at that
direct
site.
supervisor
Yep.
of the
If they're the
associate.
direct supervisor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
If there's somebody else is supervising them,
Okay.
then the supervisor can do that. You don't have to be an owner to supervise, but if you're an owner and you're supervising, you have to also be seeing clients at the same site.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Betty?
I know, I'm trying here. I thought it was absolutely crystal clear, and then, so how does, this is not going to alter the fact that, that they can contract for supervision? I mean, if,
No.
because.
Because it's either or. You can be employed by or contracted by the employer or the owner. One of those 3 have to provide supervision to the associate. And if they're providing a supervision to the associate, they also need to be providing services to the client. So I can be an owner in one of the owners of a professional corporation. Roseanne and I own it together. I'm the owner, but I'm choosing not to supervise Christina, but Roseanne is. So Roseanne needs to be on site providing supervision
And seeing clients.
and seeing clients as the
You
owner.
can say how many, but you have to have,
Yeah.
You can have one, like
You
I
can have
see
one,
my
but you have to be
example,
doing it.
right?
You have to have like a stake that makes you,
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
As long as, yes, as long as it doesn't contradict, I mean, in my mind, it was like contradicting the fact that they can contract for supervision, because does that come under, that they are an employee of the
Well, say for example, Roseanne and I, our corporation, she's got the max number of supervisees, I've got the max number of supervisees, but business is growing, I need another supervisor. I can contract with
You
Steve.
can contract with
To
Steve.
bring Steve in to supervise.
So the fact that
Christie.
they're contracting is considered employed by.
Yeah, because we're saying you're either employed by or contracted by Roseanne and I.
Yes.
Okay, I must not.
But Steve
Well, okay. is
Right, but Steve
employed
has
by
to
or
come to,
contracted by
you
the
know,
associate's employer.
And Steve has to see a client there.
at least
And
one
has to
client
see
there.
a client there. Okay, I'm happy. I'm sorry. I
No, that's fine.
belabored
No,
that
that's
point to
confusing.
death.
It's a lot, there's a lot of little intricacies in here because it's a big piece of the law woven through a lot of sections.
Yeah.
So it means that the teleconferencing supervision is not allowed.
Correct, right.
Teleconferencing, yeah, because it has to
Yeah,
be
that's
physical
only in the
presence.
exempt
Yeah.
settings, yes.
That's what it means.
I like throwing curveballs, just asking questions.
No, that's good. It's
No, that's why we do this.
Great. Okay, so any other comments before we move forward? Okay, and so, all right, so maybe we can take another section. Oh, yeah, let's
Yeah, we have
finish
two more in this.
Yeah, let's finish those two more, and then we'll take a break.
Okay. And so the next one really goes along those lines, the 6 supervisees. We were proposing 4. At the meeting, it came up they wanted to do 6. So pretty much same discussion as the last one. Are we comfortable with 6? Do you think supervisors can handle 6? Okay.
So now, so the group supervision number is 1 to 8.
Yes.
And so, so that's just, and that rule applied to private practice also.
Yes.
Okay.
This is the number you are personally responsible for.
Yes, right. That's the maximum. Yeah.
Okay. Right. All right, then moving on to the next thing.
Oh, wait.
Oh, is there any?
Public comment. Sorry. 1 to 6. Okay. All right. Let's move on.
And then just one thing that we wanted to bring up, because this comes up sometimes, and we just want to make sure that this is okay with everybody. As written, the current law and the current proposal both limit the number of supervisees per supervisor in private practices and professional corporations only. So you could have an exempt setting that's a corporation that's not a private practice, or just a business that's hiring therapists. And there's no limit on supervisees in those. And so Kim and I just wanted to bring that up to make sure that that's truly your intent, that there's the 6th limit is for private practices and professional corporations. There's no limit on exempt settings or other non-exempt settings that are not private practices or professional corporations. Are we okay with that?
I think so. So, so that not limited, basically it's just applied to exempt setting.
It's just, yeah, well, so private practices and professional corporations are a type of non-exempt setting. So there's other things out there that could be like a drug and alcohol counselor company, or there could be, a corporation like a Kaiser that's not a private practice or Kaiser's like part of Kaiser is a private practice, parts of a professional it's a different type of corporation. So those kind of in between hybrid entities that are not exempt and they're not private practice, they don't have any limit on the number of supervisees per supervisor. They don't currently, and they wouldn't under this proposal. So we just we get that question sometimes, and we just want to make sure that that's clear that this isn't limiting those.
Only, or
It's only limiting it to 6 of private practice or professional corporations.
I have a question, on or off. So if I'm a private owner, I own my own practice, am I going to be restricted to associates if I'm putting them in exempt setting places?
So if you're a private practice, you can only have 6 supervisees, period.
So I can only put 6 people in exempt settings?
In your practice.
In my practice? Okay.
Right.
For
Now,
you, if you
for
have
you.
another therapist, you can
But
have
me
6
down the
more.
street,
Yeah, I'm just saying that's one way to,
right.
if that were allowed, that would be one way to get around the whole thing is I'm an entrepreneur, but since I'm putting my associates in exempt settings,
Oh, then you can do
sky's the
20.
limit.
Yeah. if it were up to me and I ruled the world, I would limit it 1 to 6 across the board, honestly. I think that how can you be responsible for all those supervisees?
No, I agree.
Yeah,
I'm just
And it's-
wondering if that's, that we covered our base there and there's no loophole. As an entrepreneur, that's what I focus on, and I can have by far more than 6 if I'm sticking them into exempt settings.
If you're supervising them, you're signing on your license that they're doing X, Y, and Z, and then you're doing that. So you can be an entrepreneur and like have it, if you're putting them in exempt settings and you're their supervisor, you have a third-party agreement, but you're still signing that you're doing X, Y, and Z. So
As a private practitioner.
Okay, so I just want to make sure we're covered there, so.
But I do think we have a loophole. I mean, we clearly have a loophole.
Right, you can work in.
And I don't know that we talked about that. I don't remember talking about that at the exempt committee. I mean, it seems, I hate, whenever I say something like this, there's always an unintended consequence. But it seems like it should just say in all non-exempt settings. I mean, that seems intuitively obvious, but I'm sure there are unintended consequences to that. I don't know.
I think from staff perspective in responding to this question, it certainly is simpler. Not that that should be the reason we apply it across the board, but then we get into, okay, so what is the setting you work in? How is it classified? Is it a corporation? Is it a professional corporation? The associates have no clue.
Yeah.
And I think if we should not be looking at that level, honestly, it should be, what do we think is responsibly the right thing to do when it comes to supervision? Is it limiting, 1 to 6 because you're classified this way and the wild, wild west over here? Or do we think that everyone benefits with a specific ratio?
And my thought is if it's a non-exempt setting and we have control over it,
Right.
then it should be equitable.
I agree.
It should be fair and applied across the board.
I agree.
I'd be interested to hear if any of the stakeholders can identify some unintended consequences that we're not thinking of. But it doesn't make any sense to me that you're carving out exceptions for certain non-exempt settings.
I would agree.
So non-exempt setting, that's actually, I personally like it a little bit better. I think it adds clarity. And possibly, that any of the carved out organizations or whatnot that, be able to address that. So the standard can apply to just all non-exempt settings.
right, so it would be on page 20, item C at the top. It would say supervisors of supervisees. Instead of in a private practice or professional corporation, it would say in a non-exempt setting shall not serve as an individual triadic supervisor for more than a total of 6.
Right.
Okay. We need to take, comment, but.
Public comments?
Antron with CAMFT. And so are we adding just non-exempt settings, not the exempt settings?
Not the exempt settings.
Okay, and would this be confusing given that there's a limit of 8 supervisees in a group supervision at one time?
The limit of 8 applies to everybody.
So just non-exempt and not the exempt settings? So
Right,
that would be like the governmental entities, the
Government,
nonprofits.
school, college, universities still can have unlimited. But yes, for anything that's not an exempt setting, then you're limited to 6 per each.
Because that would be consistent with the private practices and the professional corporations.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that's the same question that I asked before, because, because of the number of, how much in group supervision, allow for, in private practice. So if it's the same, apply across board. So it means that, that they, if they want to form a group, they can take in a couple more for the triadic supervision and then be able to form a group for the group supervision.
Right.
Maybe to cover, whatever else of the, supervision, so.
Well, and some of the big entities do creative things with the group supervision anyway. So that doesn't change the direct supervision. I don't see that as being.
I would say it seems like we.
No, I'm just
Yeah.
thinking about the whole. So, so if they are doing group supervision, then they will still need to practice on site, have, see clients to provide psychotherapy on site. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So, any other public comments? I think we can move on. So I think the change will be, basically strike out the private practice or professional corporation and change it to non-exempt setting. Yep. Perfect. Okay.
So
The
that,
next one.
that concludes what I think that I think we feel pretty comfortable with this portion of the language. So I have all the sections written down. I don't know if Sabina would want me to read them in a motion, but if we do decide to move forward, I think that those are the things we discussed that could be moved forward with to the board. We can talk about the rest of it now and decide if we want to include it or leave it for a separate bill. So
What do you want to do? Would you rather?
we don't have to decide right now. I'm just saying this is kind of like the point where I think we're pretty comfortable with moving forward.
You know what? I think that let's do one motion for that. I think it's easier, right? Because of the changes, right?
Right, so maybe one motion for everything you've discussed before. We'll tidy it up, put a bow on it.
Okay.
And then move on, and because the committee may decide not to recommend anything to the board right now in the remaining
Yeah, right,
sections.
right.
That makes
So,
sense?
yeah, I think this is like a one chunk. So let's just deal with this, this.
So can you give us some language for a motion then?
Roseanne's been keeping track of the section numbers.
Do you want me to read all the sections? I mean, I'm going to have to do some, there's some sections that have both things in, so we're just going to basically say, the motion would be, do I need to read all the sections, Sabina?
So I think, I'm looking at your memo, page 4 and 5 and 6, with the bold A, B, C, D, E type of what we covered. I think we could summarize that, those items discussed, as well as the additional edits that were already discussed with the, and we can go over the real quick edits. There aren't many. There weren't any to the,
Definitions.
the definitions, and then the change for governmental agency in the second section for 4980.06 and 4980.05. And then the last supervisee sections that you just covered. Did I miss any?
Those are the big ones.
4980.43.4.
Point 4, yep. And page 20, yeah, that's also 4980.
20 with the change.
Yeah. So we'll
for the
basically
non-exempt change.
pull all of that in and take, the motion for that piece is to take it to the board.
We're going to recommend with those edits that you guys just did, and we'll recommend to the full board at the next meeting.
Okay.
I'm going to have a go at it. I'll see, but you can revise me. Oh, just say so moved? Then that was tough. So moved.
I'll second that.
I thought you wanted me to recapture that.
Oh, no. No.
Well done.
Okay. So any other public comments regarding the motion? Okay, we're good to go. Christina.
Were you the second on that, Christina?
Yeah, I am the
Okay,
second.
thank you.
I'm always second.
Here's the vote. Christina Wong,
Aye.
Barbara Brown,
Or say here.
Betty Conley. Motion carries.
Thank you very much. So let's take a quick 10 minutes break. So the time now is 10:14, and let's come back at 10:25. Thank you.
Where's Kenneth?
Are we ready? Okay. So welcome back for the Board of Behavioral Sciences Policy and Advocacy Committee. The time is 10:29 now, and we will start again. So Roseanne, take it away.
Okay, so we're on part 2 on page 6 of the packet, extending the registration number to 8 years with coursework required for a subsequent registration number, and then in return, allowing private practice with a subsequent registration number. So, and the reason we're bringing this up as part of this item is that the length of a registration number is tied in with the definition of private practice and professional corporations, because you're not allowed to work in one of those settings right now with a subsequent number. It's been the subject of much debate during my time with the board over the past 10 years. And the newly proposed definitions should help with one part of the issue, the confusion over where a trainee can work or an associate can work. However, another part of the debate also centers on the difficulty of someone with a subsequent number finding work and having it not be a private practice. Currently, the associate registration can be held for a total of 6 years. After 6 years, they obtain another number and they have to work, they can work anywhere but a private practice and professional corporation. We've had several discussions over the years about the 6-year rule. The latest was February 2018, and we opted to wait for further data because we had just passed the bucket bill, which streamlined the categories of experience. We had just allowed triadic supervision, and we were in the process of also slightly decreasing the required LCSW experience hours from 3,200 to 3,000. At the time, we were reporting on approximately 12.6% of AMFTs and 10.5% of ASWs being on a subsequent registration number, with it being too early to tell for APCCs. And it was taking LMFT applicants and LCSW applicants about 3.3 years for LMFTs at that time and 3.7 for LCSWs at that time. And those numbers have held pretty steady over the years when we've looked. At the June meeting, we recommended a solution that would extend the length of the registration number and eliminate the private practice prohibition. However, there's a need to maintain an incentive to obtain licensure and ensure continued proficiency. And it needs to be a somewhat, it needs to be a good incentive. And so what we had proposed was requiring at the end of those first 8 years, requiring additional graduate level coursework. So we would increase the length of the registration under this proposal from 6 years to 8 years. The allowable age of the experience hours would also be increased from 6 years to 8 years to match the extended registration time. But then if the applicant needed a subsequent registration number, they must have a passing score on the law and ethics exam that was obtained within the past 2 years, and the 2 years can be discussed, of course. And then we proposed successful completion of 15 semester units of graduate level coursework within the past 2 years, covering specific topic areas. And if they met that, they would be able to obtain a subsequent number with no private practice prohibitions. So of course there was significant discussion at the exempt setting committee about this and allowing the 8-year registration. And there were a lot of really good suggestions. There were suggestions about putting a hard stop at the end of 8 years, or an 8-year registration with a possible 2-year extension at the end, and requiring CE at the end of a certain number of years. And the hard stop in the discussion, from what I could tell, was kind of favored. And while that is a potentially attractive alternatively, I think that we need to discuss a little bit more what that means, because I don't think that it means exactly what we think it means. It essentially means that if a person reached 8 years and still wanted to apply for licensure, we can't ever ban somebody from a profession. We can't say you're never going to get licensed no matter what. It would mean that they would have to have a degree that meets all current requirements. So what does that mean? That means different things for different license types. The LCSW law does not state, so the LCSWs have a national accrediting agency that accredits their degree programs, that we require the degree to be from an accredited we require the degree to be accredited by that institution. So we don't state like specific units in LCSW law. We state very little specific coursework. There's some California specific coursework we want them to have, but not much. Nothing compared to the LMFT and LPCC, because we haven't reached, we don't have that same accreditation requirement for those schools. They have to be accredited, but not by a specific MFT or LPCC accrediting agency. So that means that all social work applicants who have an accredited degree, whether new or old, would pretty easily meet the current requirements to go back and get in the application process. They might have to take a few extra courses, like we just added a suicide assessment course. So if they couldn't show evidence of having taken that, they might have to show that they had that 6-hour course. So that's what they would have to do. But meeting current requirements means something really different for LMFTs and LPCCs. These license types now require 60-unit degrees. It used to be 48. That changed over the past about 10 years. And LPCC law now requires 13 core content areas. It used to be 9. For applicants with older degrees, they're going to be more likely to have 9. So if we tell these applicants that fall out that they have to meet a new degree, they have to meet current requirements, it means a new degree for them because you can't go back and remediate. So there's a kind of an inequity between LMFT and applicants and LCSWs. And also, it doesn't seem to provide adequate public protection because substantial coursework for LCSWs is not necessarily required. And so that's not really, there's not really a balance there. It's sort of two extremes. And for these reasons, we want to kind of ask for reconsideration of the 15 semester units. It seems to provide the best balance of fairness across the license types because it is stringent, it is difficult, but they've had 8 years. It doesn't require anybody to go back and get a brand new degree. It doesn't, allow somebody to get back in with really old coursework with no refresher. But it does, it's a significant refresh of coursework, and it is difficult, but it acts as an incentive for the person to finish gaining their hours in 8 years. If they really want to continue after that and they're willing to do the work to do it, they can still work in a private practice after that. So they lose that barrier. So the proposal is drafted, it's on page 25. And if the committee wishes to proceed and with requiring the 15 units, we also need to decide what 15 units should, if there's any coursework we want to specify that's part of those. We can get to that in a minute. So I'll just open it up for discussion.
So I thought a little bit more about, the new proposal. So I think the 8 years with the 15 semester units, that will equate about like 45, regular CEUs. And, I think that's, that is a really good proposal. I have a little concern about, about the oversight, for those who continue in private practice. So, I'm just thinking about, under, because of under the current, law, that, if let's say, the associate were able to get all the, clinical hours, to be eligible for the licensing examination, so by rule, they have to get supervision. And yet, they're not required to track and submit those hours. So which means that, that the oversight, the responsibility will be on the supervisor. And yet, then there's no oversight. And then we're really talking about, that, I'm concerned about the public protection, consumer protection especially, that they don't have that mechanism. And, and possibly, then there is just no supervision, in the, or yes, supervision, but not being regulated, by the board, then I am just concerned that it might compromise, the public protection elements. So, yeah, Betty?
This was a hotly debated issue when we met at the exempt committee. Those concerns, absolutely, but our stakeholders were particularly vocal on this issue. This is an issue that they cared passionately about and were willing to make any compromises, basically, to have us revisit that. They felt, and we heard pretty vocally, that for the few people, and it really is a small number, it's, 15%. It's a small number. But those people tend to be our underrepresented stake licensees in that they come from low income, somewhat disadvantaged, ethnically diverse communities, and tend to have more life challenges that get in the way, that are barriers to them either completing their hours or passing the exam or whatever. And there was just really an argument made that for many of them, it's not so much, it's the time that gets, life intruded for, years where they had to put their license on suspension and come back. And for those people that may have just, really gotten an active clientele where they're feeling like they're making some progress, and then they hit that 6-year deadline, and they have to completely find a whole new venue, give up clients, give up relationships. And so it was pretty compelling. So I would just encourage us to try and ensure that the public is well protected, but at the same time, allow that continuing private practice for the extension. I don't know. It was just such a compelling argument, and people that got up to speak really made compelling cases.
I totally understand. I totally understand. But I think, from the public, consumer protection point of view, I think it's also important to, to think about that, because this is our current rule. So can anything that we can tweak, maybe like on a supervision, clause, and, so that we can make sure that, now, that in the private practice, when they don't have that mechanism for oversight, that they are actually getting, giving that quality services. I understand their struggle, but at the same time, I'm also concerned that if they cannot get their, get the, whatever reason that they're not able to get license, that is concerning. And so I will, yeah, Kim.
Yeah, so just for my clarification, because if I heard you correctly, you're concerned about the public protection component and the minimal supervision an associate will get after they've submitted their hours, correct?
So there are different scenarios.
Yeah, so for this particular piece, it's about moving the registration cap from 6 years to 8 years. This applies to people gaining their hours. Most likely, these folks haven't even entered the clinical exam yet. So they're still under the normal supervision ratio of 1 to 10. So I think the consumer protection is there.
That group, yes.
Yes.
But then you're also talking about, they're people who got their hours and yet they could not, well, for whatever reason, pass the examination.
Correct. And that's where this piece comes in to address that, is if you hit 8 years, you don't practice anymore until you complete this coursework and you pass a California law and ethics exam. So they're not practicing again at all. Once the 8 years hit, if you haven't entered the exam, the clinical cycle, you're done. You're absolutely done until you complete this coursework and you submit evidence that you passed the California law and ethics exam within a specific time period. So the consumer protection piece is there because they're removed from treating clients until they finish schooling and pass that law and ethics. And then they can come back in, and if they still need more hours, which they probably will, then they're under this supervision ratio of 1 to 10 again. So I think for that group, this addresses, we've got the consumer protection piece covered. For the group that has their hours, have been consistently in the clinical cycle, getting that one hour a week that you talked about, and if they can't pass that exam after whatever date we've specified, if they have 4 failed attempts, they're out until they complete more coursework. So
yes.
we're removing them at different stages.
Right.
But what we're addressing with this proposal, and I know you've heard it too, 6 years and the restriction on private practice is making everybody nuts. This is a way, I think, to address that issue, and then build in some remedial education if for whatever reason you can't get into the exam cycle after 8 years. So that's what we're really trying to incentivize everybody that has a registration to move into that clinical exam cycle.
Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, the associate registration was never intended to be an ongoing license to practice with no restrictions, which is what's happening now. All they have to do is take an exam once a year. I'm golden. They can practice for as many times as we want to extend or give them a subsequent registration number. There's no incentive for them to move into the clinical exam right now.
Right.
So this does that, I think.
Well, I'm not, I think the one that's in the, it's still collecting hours, which means that for the group that they will take 8 years,
Right.
to meet that 3,000 hours, that I think that's covered. But it's really about those group that, if they, let's say in year 4, because the average is about 3.7 years. So in year 4, though they will be practicing, they will be eligible to take the examination. And yet, they're not, they basically, can, for whatever reason, they can apply, to get their clinical license. I mean, the clinical exam, and when they hit year 8,
Right.
And
If they haven't
if they
passed
have not passed the clinical, then they will need a subsequent number.
If
But,
they-
but
no,
from
if
the
they
year
have-
5 to year 8, then they, by rule, that, that there's the requirement, but it's not regulated, that they're under supervision. That's
Right.
really what I, that's the group that I was concerned about.
the people in the exam cycle that only get 1 hour,
Yes.
or as described,
But that's the group, and then especially in private practice, that's the group that, I think I'm mostly concerned about the consumer protection. Because, there's just, the supervision is not being regulated.
but we just changed it so that it would be.
No, I don't think so. I don't think that's the law's been changed for that part of it. So that, I think that is to me, is a pretty important part, for for the supervision. Because, if they're supervised, regularly, and they're still, their hours being tracked, then, whatever mechanism in place that, that they are, those, that somebody got to supervise them. Yeah.
Would it help if, so through AB 93, we had said basically 1 hour per week for those that are in the exam cycle, that have collected their hours, but what if we specified that, if you're on a second number in a private practice, you have to have the regular supervision ratio?
And then be able to continue to meet that, to show documentation. Because then you will be involving the supervisor, and also,
Right.
but at the same time, yeah. So
I think,
yeah.
so I think the challenge that would be just from a program perspective is that the law says you need to complete your education, you need to have supervised experience and to qualify for the exam. So you qualify for the exam, and then now we're going to add another layer of qualification. If you're on a second number, on top of, you've got to pay to go grab 15 more semester units. You're going to, even if you took those units within your last 8th year or the 9th year, you're still losing hours. So you're still going to have to gain some hours. So you're asking them to requalify for the exam again, and I'm not sure that that's.
Even if they're, the supervisor is still, they are still, betting their license. That associate has to be under their supervision. They're responsible for.
But there's no regulatory mechanism. That's what I meant.
There is some regulatory mechanism. There are pieces in our law that say if you're an associate, this has to happen. And it doesn't, there are some parts where it carves out if you're gaining experience, this has to happen. So it's a mix.
Yes. So, so unlike, that they're very, that there are rules to follow. You can say that, did you supervise the person? Did you meet with that person, once every week? They say yes, and then that's it. You don't go anywhere. And so, so from the consumer point of view, that, that because, from the consumer point of view, and especially they're in private practice, there's no oversight about the quality. And so, so what I really think is that, I lost my train of thought, sorry. I just lost it.
Yeah,
Left the building. Sorry.
I understand, but we're not, this part of the proposal is not addressing the supervision because we've taken care of that through AB 93 and other mechanisms. This is about exam, number of attempts, how we can really motivate folks to go to licensure so we can get rid of that professional associate so that, and then introduce the associates to the idea of, hey, you've got to take some CE every year.
Right.
So I think that's what this proposal does. There are some states out there that say, hey, you don't make it within your first, in 2 years, you don't even get to come back and apply.
Right, right. So my thought, I now remember, really the licensing exam, is about the minimum requirement.
Correct.
And
Minimum
so
competency.
it's about the competency. So, so if they cannot, whatever reason, meet that minimum competency,
Right.
it tells me that, that from the consumer point of view, they need to be, continue to have, whether it's through continuing education or whether it's continued through, supervision, that, they need to receive that guidance.
Absolutely, and I think
And so that's
15
really where
semester
I
unit
come
hour, how much is it per unit anymore? I know
It's about 1, 2, 3, yeah.
300 a unit?
What?
I don't know. I think that having to go back to school and grab 15 semester units of education,
45 is, I think.
we wouldn't do CEUs. You're going to have to go back to school. And I think that's a huge motivator to hurry up and finish.
Right.
Hi, Jen.
Hi, Jan Lee. And actually, Ann came first, so.
Oh, I'm sorry. Jan Lee Wong, NASW. There is a major, major problem with your proposal to require people to take graduate level semester units at a university. A major problem. First of all, at Sac State, it's probably similar across the other universities. It's $425 per unit. So if you want someone to take 15 units, that's $6,375. The second problem is they cannot just simply go and take a class. And you're wanting them to take a class in a degree program. They cannot, once they get their degree, they can't go in there and go into that degree program and take one of those classes. They usually have to go to extension classes. They have to go to extension classes. So when you look at the array of courses offered at Sac State in their extension program, there's only one area that relates to social work, and that's school social work. And there are only 2 classes, and there are only 3 units each. So that's only 6 units, and don't forget the $425 per unit. The other areas do not apply. MBA, I don't think so. Judicial administration, no. Education for teachers, no. Accounting, no. Nursing, no. That's it for Sac State's extended studies graduate level courses. So that's a major, major problem. The other thing here is I'm not really sure where the idea that your degree got stale after a certain number of years, so you need to go refresh your degree at the university. Even the universities don't think that way. They don't say, oh, the degree we gave you 10 years ago is stale, so you have to come back to the university and refresh your degree. Once you get your degree from the university, you have your degree. So how is that connected to the idea that people were unable to get all the hours that they need, and they need a subsequent registration period? How is that connected? They're not connected. The reason why people can't get their hours is not because their degree is stale. The reason why they can't get their hours is something we've been talking about all morning. They can't find supervisors. They can't find jobs. They can't find settings. This was discussed at the exempt committee meeting. They have family stuff going on. They take time off to start a family. they have a death in the family, they have to go overseas. I mean, there's a million reasons why people can't get all their hours within a certain time period. And almost none of them are related to their degree has become stale. So I feel like it's the wrong connection here, plus this idea that, oh, you can just simply go to Sac State and get 15 graduate semester units for cheap, and the courses you want will be available, is really not the case. And I'm pretty sure it's the same at the other CSUs in California, and probably the UCs too. And certainly, if you say, well, maybe then get it through National University or Stanford or private university, why don't you go ahead and double that per unit cost? $800 per unit, $1,000 per unit. And then you want people to take 15 units, that's $15,000. So you talk about people being disadvantaged and unable to afford things. When you put this requirement in, lots of people will not be able to meet that requirement, and then you are blocking them. You are creating an obstacle for them.
Thank you, Jan Lee.
Anne with Count. So we are going to recommend the committee to strongly consider further discussions on this topic. I think there's just a lot that we would like to get stakeholder and our members' input. We echo Betty's concerns regarding the hardships that an associate and an applicant has to gain all of their hours, but we also hear Christina's concerns and Kim's concerns about wanting to motivate an applicant, because we really don't want an associate, a registered associate in private practice working in perpetuity. And we are also very concerned about, the 15 semester units. If it was 40, if it equates to 45 CEs, we understand the intent behind it. We just want to make sure that it's reasonable and feasible. It's an actuality rather than something that we're imposing on applicants and they're not able to do it. So we strongly recommend maybe slowing down on this, having further discussion on this particular subsequent registration section. We can get more feedback from our members, and more stakeholders can come, and we really can have a robust discussion the same way we did with the private practice and exempt setting definition. I think we spent so many years, and I think it's really good, and hopefully that's something we can do for this topic as well. But we like the 6 to the 8. I think the 8 years extension, wonderful. I think that does meet a lot of our members who do need that extra time, regardless of the reason, to finish their hours. So we do like that. I think just all the other options and the removing of the private practice prohibition and this 15 semester units, if we could have more discussion, that would be great. Thank you.
Betty?
So I had made a bunch of notes about the same thing that Jan Lee brought up, that in my experience, it's impossible to enroll in a university to just randomly take courses. And I had questions all over about how can that be accomplished? So given the complexity of this issue, I would like to recommend that we kind of table this and take it back to further committee discussion. And I'm not quite sure which committee it would be. Whether it be exempt or supervision, whether we try to reconstitute supervision committee.
No, I think we could just establish an exam committee.
And just keep going with the exempt committee?
Exam.
Oh, an exam
Yeah.
committee.
Yeah, because this
Separate
is really an
committee.
exam and licensing.
Okay, so pull it out,
You just do a
separate
new-
issue.
Yeah, pull this piece out, which is why Roseanne broke it up the way she.
I think that's a well thought out recommendation,
Yeah.
because it's a very complex issue. I think we need to resolve it. I think it's important, but I also see us creating, as Jan Lee pointed out, some hurdles that are absolutely that are rather than making it better for people, it's actually making it worse for people, which is the last thing we had wanted to do. So that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
So that's okay to carve it out and,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
yeah.
just that when we were talking in the exempt committee, one kind of, when you start talking about one, then it kind of leads into the other, and then it kind of leads into
Right.
something else. So that's why we'd like to move forward with the definitions. We really need those in the office.
Right.
We really would like to run that, but this other stuff isn't quite, begs the question, but we're not quite there yet. So I think it's fine to.
No,
to-
I think that's okay.
I do too.
So I think it's okay. Either you want to go back to the exempt setting to talk about that, or whether it's.
It's not really an exempt setting issue. I think we just put together a new committee and call it exam,
Oh,
an exam committee, or licensing and exam.
okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we can just move on to the next item. No, because they're recommending.
Yeah. Okay. Any other public comments? Very good. All
So
right.
do we need a motion?
I thought, no.
Okay. And I would just say that I think that applies to the continuing ed and the clinical exam attempts. I think we just need to roll all of that into the same
Correct.
conversation.
Right, so all the remaining items on this agenda item
Just get
3
rolled into another
will be looked
conversation.
at through another subcommittee, and then that way we can move on to agenda item 4.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Cool.
All right. Now, number 3, requiring continuing education for
Oh,
registrants.
no,
That's already all taken care of.
New
we're
topic.
gonna roll it, yeah.
All right. So it's like, so we just basically move from that point to, okay, I
So
got
we'll
it.
move
I'm
to
following.
agenda item 4.
So, okay, so let's go over, okay, so in that sense, let's talk about the BBS fee proposal.
Yes. Okay. So our board has not raised its licensing fees for at least 20 years. It was sometime in the 90s when that last happened. And so we were asked to do an audit of our licensing fees to see how our structural balance was. And the audit revealed that our licensing fees are no longer sufficient to recover our operating costs. So we're proposing fee increases, and there's on page 65 of the packet and 66. There are the current fees compared with the proposed fees by license type. So the background is that in last August, we contracted with CPS HR Consulting, otherwise known as CPS, to provide an audit of our fee structure. The report reviewed 25 main fees that cover about 90% of our revenue. And the audit revealed that in the last 4 years, while revenues for the 25 fees have increased by almost 39% because our licensing population has grown, board's expenditures have also increased by about 42%. So that's a structural imbalance. So CPS did some calculations, and they divided expenditures by staff hours and tried to allocate costs based on actual workload per activity. And so they had some proposed fee increases that are shown in the audit that range from $0 to $315. So staff took a look at that, and then but the one thing that the CPS fees didn't take into consideration was that a lot of staff hours are really spent on registrants. They're new, they're coming in, but registrants also make the least amount of money. So it was really the proposed fees on paper were really hitting the registrants hard. Registrants and LEPs because their licensing population is low. So what was done is that the proposed fees were adjusted to get the same amount of revenue, but they were adjusted from fees based solely on workload in order to achieve a more equitable result across the license types and be consistent across the license type. This is what your fee is for an associate registration, because right now it's all different depending on what type of license you have. So the committee should discuss today the proposed fees and determine how it would like to proceed. The fee increase would need to be done in 2 steps. The first step would be to run legislation to increase the fees in statute, setting a baseline amount and a maximum amount, which we just, to determine the maximum amount, we just doubled the baseline amount. That way we have some wiggle room for years to come, so that fees may be increased in the future. So, and the way that we wrote it, it would be so that upon adoption of the statute would run as the law change was run as a bill, and the way that we worded it, the lowest fee that's written would be the fee increase right away, and then we would have the option via regulations later to increase the fee down the road if we needed to. That would be a regulation change. So the second step would be, after the statute was, the legislation was run, would be to run regulations related to licensing fees. Initially, the regulations would reflect the baseline fees that had already been established in statute. And if the board wished to seek additional fee revenue in the future, it could do so by solely running regulations, not statute and regulations, as long as we didn't exceed the maximum enlisted in law. And so I did some research based on what other states do, and that can be found in attachments C, D, and E for each license type. They're really all over the board. States do things pretty differently. Some have annual renewals, some have renewals every 2 years like us, some have renewals every 3 years. So it's kind of, I think that the states that are shown show a pretty good comparison of what is out there. Some additional changes that we're making while we're amending the fee regulations. There's some other things that need to be changed related to fees. We're deleting some obsolete authority for a CE provider fees. The board no longer approves CE providers. We're deleting certain references to inactive license fees because the law already specifies those as half of the renewal fee. We're deleting language in LEP and LPCC law requiring the payment of accrued renewal fees to renew an expired license. A delinquency fee is already charged in those cases, and we don't have the authority to do that in LMFT and LCSW law, but for some reason we do in LEP and LPCC law. So just for consistency, we want to clean that up. And then let's see, we specify in statute that a delinquency fee is half the renewal fee. It's already established indirectly by establishing the fees at half that, but it's just cleaner to strictly state that it's half of it. And then amend the LPCC law for consistency and delete language to LPCC startup funds when that's no longer needed. We've already started up the LPCC license type, so there's some cleanup we can do there. So the proposals are shown in the attachments. One thing that we pulled later, I would want to say I pulled the Board of Psychology's fees. And while their application fee is only $40, their initial license fee is $400 for a psychologist. And then their biennial renewal fee is $430. So significantly more than what we're proposing. So we'll let the committee discuss.
So, I think it's inevitable that, we need to, have the fee increase. And so speaking for the for the associates, I think this is going to be a real difficult, shocker. And so now when if this, if the whole packet of the legislation pass, when will that be recommended to be in effect?
We'd run it next year, be 21.
Yeah, so it would be 2021.
Mhm.
I think
January
that's written
1st,
in the,
yeah.
in the.
Well, if it's legislation and the governor signs it, it's effective that following January.
Right.
So,
Yeah, so it will be between 2021 or 2022.
so most likely 20, we'd need
So
it 2021.
It needs to be, it would be January 1, 2021.
Yeah.
So, so we have about a year and a half. So, so I think, it's going to take a lot of education and assistance from the stakeholders to really help educate the associates that, yes, there's a big fee increase, because, when you look at, that the renewal and the, application for licensures and law and ethics, and you're really talking about like a good amount of money too.
Right, but if you
So,
can,
yeah.
if you take and look at, if you review page 135, you'll see that the proposed fee for the associates was actually $280.
Right.
And then you compare that to a license renewal of $130, it just doesn't balance out.
No,
And-
it's-
And
yeah.
we can't put, I am so sympathetic that, yes, your fees are, because they're going to see it, my registration fee is going to double. I get it. But at the same time, the alternative is if we don't raise the fees and I don't want to balance it, one, on the registrants, because essentially we just would have created just a barrier. You're not going to get anybody in. the licensees, once they're through, they should be supporting some of the bulk of the fees. The bulk of what our work, you're only renewing every 2 years. Sadly, if we don't do anything, or we don't raise it, or basically, we will not be solvent in 2021. And that means the services that we're providing now, and some may say not getting, will cease to exist. That's just the reality. But in 20 years,
No,
yeah, I mean,
think-
I know.
I think it's just, social work or, MFTs, mental health professional never really just pay well. No, I'm not saying that, that it is not to, I am not advocating for the fee increase. I think the fee increase is inevitable, but really it's about preparing so that, and soliciting the help from the associations to really help us out, to get the words out.
Yeah, and
you
that's
know.
one of the things we'll do.
Yeah.
We'll be at all our
A lot of
outreach events.
outreach
I mean, I've already talked about it. I had the pleasure of delivering that wonderful news at the LPCC conference.
Yes, yes.
I'm sure it was just so thrilling to hear. But
Well, I really like what Roseanne, provided too, that information to compare with different states, Oregon, and Arizona to different aspect, neighborhood county, that neighborhood state, right? They're more expensive.
Right.
And so it's actually really wonderful that these data, would help, to provide, to just comfort and give the fact to the associate that this is inevitable. And this is that not like, the BBS, again, you just take my money, you take my check and not doing anything.
we're government.
So-
It's paper and money. It's just what we do.
It's a joke.
I know. I am joking, but yeah.
So, Debbie? Deborah, sorry.
I think this is, it's sticker shock. Especially for the social workers, they're doubling the fee in one fell swoop. And then, of course, the other ones are not as drastic for the clinical counselors. However, I think, and I say this with all honesty, if it's been 20 years, some of this falls back on us. We have not kept up. And my question is, instead of, we know that this field is increasing. Just the time we've sat on this board, I know just the employees have almost gone up 30 or 40%.
Well, we've doubled.
Yes. So, and we know it's going to keep going. There's a huge need. We are going to be in demand, and we can see that by the registrants. However, it isn't, when you sit back, it's not fair to not do due diligence on our part by making predictions of growth and seeing what down the road would be something that we would have to implement. And so it's maybe $10. It's maybe $20 that the increase, instead of a doubling. And I just want to say that we bear some of that responsibility for having to go from one and double it. I mean, that's huge. So my question to you, Roseanne, is there anything, and I don't know whether it would be in our sunset or what avenue we would take, that it would be something in maybe the regulatory and the law itself, that there is a mandatory review of these fees so that they are absolutely looked at, because someday you're going to retire. Okay, so someday you're going to retire, and we would hate to have somebody who comes in new that just says, oh, okay, well, that's something I'm going to put on the back burner for right now. I'm just asking, is there a vehicle that could be put into place, whether it be law or whether it be the sunset as one of our priorities, that we actually look at the future based on the past, and we make provisions so that this thing doesn't, I mean, okay, I have a teaching credential. We know there's going to be an increase because they put on another 1 million teachers. So that's something that we know is going to happen. So when you get it, you complain. Of course. What? They want how much? Don't they know what teachers make? And we make about as much as mental health. But it's something that we know happens because it's so consistent. and we know that they have to have the money because they have so many more people. It's just, it's the way we have to do business. When it's 90% of your operating budget, you are going to become insolvent.
Right. So
But we can predict that it's going to continue to go up. So I'm just looking for a vehicle, and I think it would only be fair to the stakeholders that we know that this is going to be something that's reviewed on an annual or a biannual, and then the predictions of what it might cost to do business would come to the board, and the board actually talks about it. So it's something that's predictive. It's not something that's, we just decided to do it this time because now we're broke. I don't think we can operate, I don't think it's fair to everybody to operate under those conditions. I'm
So-
glad that you're doing this now because we have to, or we don't even exist. We're going to be in the red in a year and a half?
So Deborah, I think, Kim can probably speak for it a little bit better that, that we are so governed by the reserve fund. So I think we're, because we have to have a certain number before we can do the fee increase. And stuff.
Well, here's the challenge. Fee increases, if you're going to do a fee increase, first of all, you cannot have any loans out to the general fund. That ended this last year. Second, they're not popular in the legislatively. I mean, it's just really hard to get a fee increase. So those are two, I don't know, political landscapes we have to navigate through. What I would tell you about this fiat that we did, we asked them to look to the future.
Good.
That's exactly what we did. The numbers that they provided us, that's what they did. And if we used their numbers as they dictated and charged Betty's profession $415 for a license, then, they worked it out how much we would have year in and year out. Yes, so there is that caveat. As moving forward, part of the budget, when I present the budget during the board meeting, that's why you get, this is how much we're spending, this is how much revenue we're taking in, this is how much is in our reserve for, the rainy day. And by statute, if I have more than 24 months, then I have to reduce those fees. We've done that once, I believe it was in
2002, 3.
Okay, so we reduced fees because we exceeded that, and then our growth started happening. So, and I think if just the 10 years I've been doing this, the growth has been extraordinary.
It has.
It's exploded in a lot of different ways. Some we knew about, some I didn't know about, and it's a very happy situation. So I think we have mechanisms in place to continue to evaluate that. Once we get over this hump, moving forward, and whether it's me or whoever's after me, and you're getting budget reports, if you start seeing the reserves start ticking down, to me, that would be a trigger to say, we need to start looking at our fees. Do we need to do an increase? And then to do an increase, you're going to need to contract out for another fee audit.
Okay.
So they're there. But in the past 10 years, if we had wanted to raise fees, because we had $12.3 million out to the general fund, there is no way we would have ever gotten a fee increase through. And because the response to being insolvent is, take the money from what you loan, we'll pay your loan back. That's how we've been making it over these last few years, is because by design or, luck of the draw, squirrel, even the squirrel gets lucky periodically. I mean, I've been pushing it to get what we need, and that has triggered some of the loan payments back and kept us solvent.
Right.
So everything you talked about, we have in place. So I think moving forward, we're in a good spot.
Okay, I guess maybe I'm just remiss because I don't remember. I mean, we've talked about it, maybe someday this thing, once the loan because that was kind of coming back to us to kind of keep us afloat. But I guess I never, or I can't remember, and that could be absolutely the case. Having a board discussion actually on the agenda saying, okay, board members from the staff, this is what we're looking at. This is what the trend is looking at. Just be aware that I'm hoping this is probably going to trigger X. Be aware of it because this is what we're probably going to have to do. But that would at least be
Yeah, and we signaled,
like Christina said, an educational call that, okay, guys, you got the budget in front of you too, and you see what's coming down the pike. So at the end of the day, we don't want to hear the stakeholders go, where's that coming from? I mean, we're having the conversations, you're seeing it on the agenda as a conversation.
right. And
But
for
I know
every-
we've been talking, and we
Yeah.
know this is coming down the pike.
Right,
I don't have a problem with it.
Mhm.
It's just that sometimes the sticker shock, especially for the social workers, is going to be huge.
Right, and the clinical counselors benefit because they came on in 2010, and that we set fees that were at an appropriate level at that point.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, we've been talking about the fee audit, the fees for over a year, so
Yeah, it's been a while. So it's really, we know that it's coming down the pike, and now we're seeing the numbers. Now we're
Right.
pursuing, legislation. So it's kind of like it's expected, and yet, still, you have every year new graduates coming on board, and so they are the one, who actually, they didn't know the history, but at the same time, they knew that, it's like, oh my God, right out of my bag, $200, and annually. It's $150. So, they just have to, we just have to, kind of like deal with that
Every 2
emotional
years.
reaction.
I
to-
agree.
And then Debbie, why am I calling you Debbie, right? I never, like Deborah said, that I think it's the board members', responsibility, to also have that, oversight, for the, for the financial situation of the board. So, Patty?
So I had a couple of points. I did want to thank the powers that be that in looking at how the cost of the different, and certainly there was a disproportionality with LEPs because of the small number of licenses. So I think that leads to my point, which is the one thing I looked at was, were the costs equitable? Were they balanced across the licenses? And they really are. And I think we can defend, I mean, it's like how defensible is where we landed. And I feel like at the end of the day, it's very defensible from a fairness and an equity standpoint, in that all of the licensees, I mean, the associate registrations are all in alignment. The exam applications are all in alignment. So I think that's, while it is absolutely, I acknowledge sticker shock. I mean, we're all going to have to be paying twice as much, but we're all having to pay twice as much. It is really bringing some equity to it. And then the other piece of this, and I don't know whether it's appropriate or not, but it certainly needs to be considered. And when we look at the fees and everything else, our costs have, I mean, Kim and I were just talking last week about some of our cost increases, and our costs are increasing proportionate to these increases. So while it is, it's yes, yes, there's a huge sticker shock. It's appropriate, it's necessary, and I think we just have to move it forward. And
Yeah.
I think we had some structural limitations that prohibited us from doing it sooner.
And what I like about the language is also, there's a range, so we don't have to go back and, I mean, it's a wonderful thing that, it saves the staff, probably, good amounts of time, and state legislature, that you have to, every time you have to increase $10, you have to go back, and change the whole packet of the language.
Crazy.
It's crazy. So, so I it's inevitable, and I think we express the concern, so I kind of like beat it to death for a little bit, right? So, public comments.
Hello. Kenneth Edwards, California Association for LPCCs. We get it. Fees have to go up. Growth happens, right? It's a thing. The LPCCs love fees, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? The sticker shock is a bit much, okay? The LPCCs appreciate being on par with everybody else, and we understand that we were sort of the latecomers to the party. But is there room to sort of have a graduated percentage amount that would be more palatable, that would be easier to communicate in a public information campaign, something that would sort of be explained a little bit differently. Because like Deborah said, I mean, the fact that they haven't been raised in so long, you know, you have to make up money for that lost time and the projected growth. But at the same time, that's a huge difference. It's a huge jump immediately, right away, that is pretty shocking. And someone said the comment earlier, but as students and associates coming in to see that, does it then create yet another barrier to entry for a lot of people? And then if we look at renewal fees over time, CE fees that they have to get, graduate courses that some have to do, just when we start adding and adding and adding, that really begins to be prohibitive. There was another chart that I saw in the paperwork comparing to other states. I mean, once again, California gets to be at the top of the list of the most expensive for everything. And we look at that with people coming from out of state as they're looking at fees and maybe transferring their profession over. I mean, just a few things to consider. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kenneth. And Jan Lee?
Jan Lee Wong, NASW. I fully support the proposal to raise fees. It's inevitable, as somebody said. I just want to make an editorial statement. Basically, it doesn't seem fair that LPCCs and social workers subsidize the fees for MFTs. By making them the same fees across the board, you're actually not really considering the workload. I know the study considered the workload, but it probably looked at it in its entirety. It just seems like the workload for MFTs is much greater for the board and its staff than it is for social workers. In addition to the quantity issue, for example, the review of the social work degree, as already stated, is pretty simple. The review of the many MFT degrees and versions of MFT degrees and course content has got to be labor intensive. So I just want to point that out. You know, MFTs in the past have pointed out that they contribute more, so they should get more benefit. I'd just like to say in this particular case, it's the other way around. We're subsidizing them.
Thank you.
Want to respond to that, Steve? They looked at all of the workload generally, just so you know. It's every different desk. And I think you might be happy to hear that we have the #1 population of LCSWs in the country now. So yes, we're growing, and we know that the trend with MFTs is on a slightly downward tick. But I'm going to just be this pragmatic about it. It's how many, we all buy washer and dryers for our home, right? So I can remember when I bought my first set, my first home, it was probably, $800. And I got a really nice set because I'm a diehard Maytag fan. I moved into our current home 16 years ago, and as fate would have it, of course, that lovely set took a dump. So that didn't work anymore. I went out to buy it. It was over $2,000. It was, and it's this, and I think when you can say that about any commodity that's out there, it invariably just goes up. There's an increase, and I think that you could apply that same logic across the board to licenses. I mean, I get that, 10 years ago, it's $75. Well, we're 10 years later down the road, and if I have to buy that same thing, your schooling is more than it was 10 years ago. Your gas is more than it was 10 years ago. Your rent's more than it was 10 years ago. It's just life. And I know there's a number of us in this room that remember when gas was under $1.
Right.
I don't like it, but what I promised when I spoke at the LPCC conference, we understand that it's hitting your pocketbooks. We get it. I didn't like the audit when it first came out because it really put the onus on registrants to support the funds of the BBS. I think that's wrong, and I think what Steve and I tried to do is take that same percentage of increase and just readjust it a little bit to make it a little more equitable. We know it's going to sting, but hopefully it's not too bad.
And the other thing that I don't know, we haven't really mentioned, but with CPS, they did have a very aggressive approach at this to get, I think it was like $6 million a year to get our reserves up to 5. We've slowed that down a bit as much as we could, so it's really leaving us. I mean, it's kind of tenacious already as the way it is. I would prefer a little bit more funds, but so we did that because with that 6 with what they were proposing, it would have been way worse.
So I want to go back to Kenneth, one of the comments, about basically the incremental increase, for the fee. So, it will make it more palatable, and also be able to, to just, but I think it's easier to educate the public that, this is the bottom and this is what we're, in 4 years or 5 years, this is what we want to see happen. So any possibility for that? I just want to make sure that we cover that.
Like I said, what we're looking at right now with the proposed fees, it makes me a little bit nervous still that we're not going to reach that reserve in time. And then the incremental fees, you have to realize that you have to do the legislation and stuff. So we'd be working on this on a continual basis. And I don't think that probably looks good with legislation where you're actually raising fees every year. I assume that would be frowned upon. So
I think we have a very good opportunity right now to get this in legislation and get it through without a great deal of pushback, at least from the legislative arena. So I think what we've done, Steve and I have crafted what we believe gives us our best opportunity to get it through the legislature and get us back into a flush environment, although not as flush as the CPS study would have actually wanted us to do. But we can, address that in time. But I think this gets us where we need to be for the next few years.
And I think just the incremental thing, I think out of that, though, is really the better explanation. Hopefully we can present to everyone why these, I think we talked about that last time. I mean, really putting out there in layman's terms of it's what this money goes to. I mean, what's happening with the increases and why we're increasing it. So
Maybe we do that
definitely.
for the September meeting, just have a full-blown presentation about it.
Yeah, I think that would be really good. At least it's on record. Everybody can see it. So, yeah.
In that presentation, is there a chance that, the newsletter you put out?
Yeah.
That it's very articulated, exactly why we're doing what we're doing, and then that'll be on the internet as well?
Yeah, we can do the next.
Yeah. Kenneth?
Kenneth Edwards, California Association for LPCCs. Like I said, we support fee increases. They're necessary. We have to do it, right? We're willing to be a participant in that conversation and how to make that more palatable for people to understand why these things happen. Because I think that's where it could really fall apart, is when people see that notice of, oh my gosh, my fee is increases, and that's all they're going to see.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's
It's kind of like your tax bill, but yeah.
yeah, right. So we get those envelopes, right, when our new fee increases come. So just being able to explain it in the right way, I think would help. May not help everything, but it'll help, right?
Yeah, we'll have let's plan on doing a real robust presentation at the next 2 board meetings about fee increases.
Well, and just to piggyback on what Kenneth just said, if we could discuss including something with the renewal notice that had some of those talking points. The fact that we were structurally unable to increase fees over the past few years because of the fact that we had outstanding loan repayments, the fact that our costs have gone up so dramatically that we have had to increase board staffing so dramatically to address. So I just think that bulleting those, not a big, long thing, but just, we understand this is a real dramatic increase. We want you to have an understanding. This was, discussed extensively, blah, blah, thoughtful bullets. So that's my thought.
I think explaining the why, in a very just, precise and concise way. Yeah, and it always help that, people understand, oh, you haven't raised fee for 20 years. And so, that itself is already a pretty good selling point. So, Anne?
And Tran with CAMP, we support and understand the need for, excuse me, fee increase. I think what's really important, you're all stating it, is the education. So CAMP on our part, we will definitely inform our members. I think if you can do what Betty is suggesting, maybe a video, we can tack it onto our newsletter, put it on our website, anything like that, we're more than happy to do anything you need to spread the word and inform our members. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Janley?
Janley Wong, NASW, will do the same as Ann mentioned. I also have some ideas. I'll just share them with you. You may not use them if you don't want to. Reminding people that sometimes their employers will pay some of these fees, and they should ask, Don't be shy, just ask.
I don't know about county.
Kim,
but-
will you pay my fees?
Sure.
The other thing
Nonprofit,
is,
maybe.
yeah, exactly. I'm sure you could ask your employer. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The other one would be, and I realize it's dangerous because we're talking about tax advice, but for those in the private sector, private practitioners, these fees are probably deductible against their income tax. So just small things that say, by the way, this is possible. We're not guaranteeing it. We're not saying you qualify for it. But here are some things that might help offset the fee increase.
So Janley, let me remind you, ASW, no 1099. He's
it.
our guru, right? when you can give us that history, why they cannot be independent contractor. But anyway.
I would just like to throw in, just kind of as a side note, the legislature is aware, this is fee increases of this magnitude is common among boards because of the hurdles to raising fees. The legislature, particularly the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, did sponsor a bill this year, AB 613, that would have it was proposing to allow smaller, more incremental fees by the CPI. That bill has stalled. I don't know what's going to happen. It had some, because it's a fee bill, it's hard to get fee bills through the legislature. But that did come from the Assembly Business and Professions Committee, so they are aware of some of these sort of larger issues with boards raising fees and having to wait until, they're almost insolvent to do that. It's not just our board that this happens. So we'll continue to watch that bill.
So I would like to make a motion to direct staff, what is the motion again? To accept this, to recommend, to the board, for this legislative proposal.
I second that.
Okay. So any other discussion? Okay, Christina?
So the motion was to recommend to the board to support this. Thank you. Christina Wong,
Yes.
Deborah Brown, Betty Conley.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So the last discussion item is in relating to the continuing education regulations.
Yes,
And that's Christy.
that would be me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that we had originally brought a draft of this to this committee way back in January of 2018, and it just had to be backburnered. We got a long letter from CAMP asking us to address some additional issues, and so we're ready to bring it back at this point. So there are a number of things in here that people were generally okay with. There were some other discussion items, and then we'll address the stakeholder concerns. So basically, what we're proposing here is to amend our CE, continuing education regulations, and there are also some that aren't quite CE. There are additional training regulations. We had some regs that were for our transition from board approval providers. So we're proposing to delete those. We would just do some clarifications and updates of regs. We have several minor changes, amending requirements to qualify for a CE waiver, and then amending the additional training, which is coursework required to be completed by applicants for licensure or for LEPs renewing for the first time. So we'll start with the additional training requirements. So one thing that we're doing is updating the list of acceptable providers for human sexuality, child abuse assessment and reporting, substance dependency, California law and ethics, and crisis or trauma counseling. So we're basically updating the list of acceptable providers and streamlining them into one section. Right now, it's kind of all over the place. We would be updating the content required for the human sexuality course for consistency with what's in the statute and also what's in the DSM-5. It's not been updated in over 30 years, so as you can imagine, it needed some updating. The alcoholism and other chemical substance dependency class, we added that it should also include substance abuse. We realized because it only addresses dependency, so those are different things. And then now we're going to talk about CE. So number 4 on is CE strictly. So clarifying that people who hold more than one license with the board only have to do 36 hours per renewal period as opposed to 36 hours per license type. So that's how we currently do things, but it's nice to have a clarification in the law about that. We do get that question. Clarifying that an individual who holds a retired license is exempt from CE, similar thing. We want to put that clear in the law. Deleting the requirement that LMFTs and LCSWs who began graduate study prior to 1986 take a CE course in alcoholism and substance dependency. At this point, this requirement has been, or is now addressed differently, and so they all have to meet this prior to license issuance. So it no longer needs to be CE. They're all going to have it before they are issued a license. And then for licensees who teach a course, a CE course, we're going to clarify that it can only count the hours that they spend teaching the course can only count towards CE if it's taught for a board-accepted provider. So it basically has to be a course that we would accept in order for it to count. Number 8, I'm going to come back to because it's a little more of an issue. We'll hit that last because there might be a little discussion. So we're going to skip to number 9. We would now allow a licensee who completes a board occupational analysis survey to be awarded with 6 hours of CE, hoping that might, pump up our ability to get people to respond to those very lengthy occupational analysis surveys. Number 10 is updating the list of approval agencies and acceptable providers. And then 11 is to delete outdated sections that pertain to the former program. And so getting rid of the transitional language. And again, there's some other technical changes. So jumping back up to number 8. So this is also applying to people who teach a CE course. Right now, you can teach courses and you can count this. You could teach courses and that be the only CE that you have to get. So say you teach the same 2 classes year after year after year, you can keep claiming those for your CE all the time and never have to take anything new. And they can only count the same amount of time that somebody who's taking the class could count. So what we're proposing is to limit it to half of their CE. So teaching courses can only count for 18 of the 36 hours every 2 years. So I wanted to leave that one for last in case there was any discussion on that. So we can open the whole thing up for a discussion, but I wanted to stop there.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, let's do it. Okay, so you want to do it section by section, huh?
You want to go section by section on the changes?
Yeah, I would like to
maybe?
stop here and see if there's any discussion on
Okay.
any of the prior that I just covered.
So that would be text starting on 163 with human sexuality training?
Yes, yeah.
So it looks like a lot of them are clean up.
Outdated, yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of it is cleanup, yeah.
Right.
And clarification and update.
Clarification, yes. So I really don't, when I read the languages, it's clean up, there's not much change, except the number 9, that I'll go back to 150, about the occupational analysis. So I'm, how is it going to work? Because the occupational analysis, right now, I think it's conducted online, right? So how do you track those, like, that they have participated and to verify that they really, participated?
OPES receives all that data, I imagine, and they do it through SurveyMonkey, I think. So what they could do is just add a field to include a license number and a name if they want to receive 6 hours of law and education, CEUs, and then get that data field and then print out and send the certificates to them.
So my experience, I did fill out one way back when, for the LCSW, for the social worker. It doesn't take 6 hours, though.
Well, no, it doesn't, but it does take a significant amount of time. The problem is, OPES asked us to do this
Right.
because the response rates keep ticking down. And so they want some level, could we provide them incentive? And they asked us if we could do it for the LMFT OA that's starting now. Legally, I can't do it. I understand the rationale. I think it makes sense. I just don't, I'm not legally able to do it. So
I'm thinking, 6 hours, will 3 hours be, I mean, I'm just trying to balance between the
Well-
need, to, for the continuing education, 36 hours is, required for 2 years.
Right.
So 6 hours is about, 1/6 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Plus they have, to take, 6 hours of law and ethics. Supervisor has to take another 6 hours. And so that itself is 18 out of, so 18 will be, ideally just for, the continuing education component. And so I'm not nitpicking, but I'm just thinking that 6 hours, seems a bigger number than it should. So I'm wondering maybe like 3?
Well, I
Would that
think we
work,
settled
or-
on 6 because it was consistent with what we do for folks that attend subject matter expert training to provide, to review our investigations. It's what we give subject matter experts who participate in workshops, whether the workshop's 1, 2, or 3 days, you only get 6 hours.
Right.
So I think for consistency, and they all get 6 hours of law, law and ethics credit. So I think that's really what our rationale was for making this determination for that particular task.
Right, got it. And the bad thing is that board member doesn't have that exemption. We don't. We have to take exactly, just like any licensee.
Well, we're amending the law.
Yeah, well, maybe we should throw it in, right? Including board members. But it's not a, Patty, you have like. you're
Well,
wondering about that.
it would work for 6 of you. The other 7, it wouldn't matter.
Right.
So-
So, just, not a joking way, but I think it is, it is a concern, but at the same time, you're not amending any, just the regulation because of the small amounts of board member, which I told, board member, which I understand. So I'm good.
Okay.
Good explanation, and thank you, Kim.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah. And so any other suggestion, board member, public? Any suggestion needed to do the language cleanup? Oh, all good.
All right.
Oh, good. Okay.
Christy, you did
Great.
So
good.
Christy, yeah.
Okay, on to the next.
All
So
right.
next, we're going to talk CE waivers.
Right.
So we're going to update some things because the CE waiver section was written a long time ago. It hasn't been touched in a very long time, and a lot of things have changed in our world. So the first thing would be, right now it says you only have to do 18 hours of CE in your first renewal period when you're newly issued a license. That was because your initial license period varied, and now it's 2 years for everybody. So before it could have been as little as 1 year, and you've got to renew again. But now it's been changed, so everybody has 2 years that first period. So we're proposing to make it 36 hours across the board, no exception for that first period after licensure. The next would be we're updating the CE waiver request forms and instructions, which are incorporated by reference into the board's regulations. Most of our forms are not part of our regulation, and we try to not do that very much, but in this case, it is helpful. The other thing we're going to do is clarify that a CE waiver is temporary and only applies to the current renewal cycle. We would delete the reference to reasonable accommodation because that section was previously when, for the purpose of individuals who needed to complete all of their hours via self-study. So we used to limit how much you could do through self-study, but that was, the self-study limitation was placed in before there was, courses were commonly offered online. So now, because you can do all your CE online, there's no need for something called a reasonable accommodation. People who need an accommodation would apply for a waiver, which is a different thing. So, so we're proposing to just delete that, and then, if you needed an accommodation due to a disability, there's this other process now, which we'll talk about. We would delete the waiver for active duty military members because there's a different provision in the General Business and Professions Code that covers them. So they're already waived. We would delete the waiver for licensees who resided in another country for at least 1 year during their renewal cycle. That waiver, again, was created during a time when CE was not offered online commonly. So nowadays, if you might still live in a country where it's hard to get your CE online, you might have limits on what you can access through the internet. But if you're living in another country, you could renew inactive. There's no penalty for having an inactive status, and they can reactivate at any time once they complete the CE. And then now we're going to get into the waiver for disability or for caregivers. So this is where we're going to have a little more sort of technical. Maybe let's stop here. Any concern about the above? Because the next gets a little more tricky. Any discussion on the ones we just covered?
I actually like that, that cleanup of the, the very first bullet, to just make that 36 hours consistent across board. I think that is a good change. Yeah. So, board members, any other comments about this section? Nope. Public? Anne? Come on, board.
Hi, Anne with Camp. We also really like the making it consistent for the first renewal period to be just 2 years and 36, because we do get a lot of questions about, it's really confusing right now, given that sometimes it's 1 year, is it, and then we're hearing, is it 1 year from my birthday, and then is it 2 years? And so that would be very helpful. Are we talking about the waiver right now in terms of the 6 hours of law and ethics?
We'll get there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. All right, so I'll continue on.
Yes.
No. So right now, if you are a primary caregiver of an immediate family member for at least 1 year during your renewal period, you can apply for a waiver, and there's certain criteria. And one is total physical or mental disability of that family member, immediate family member. And so we're going to define that a little bit better because it's not very clear what that means. So what we would propose saying is that the family member is both unable to work and unable to perform activities of daily living without substantial assistance. I'm just giving a little more clarity to that. And then for licensees who have a physical or mental disability of their own for at least 1 year during their renewal period, we had originally brought a proposal that said we would request the evaluating professional, not request, but require the evaluating professional to certify that the condition substantially limited the licensee's ability to practice and complete the required CE. But there were concerns expressed that this language was too vague and that the professional evaluators would need more clarity. And so I looked at many different models and methods. For example, I looked at the ADA, I looked at what the Social Security Administration requires, I looked at the state, the EDD disability requirements. None of them really were fit for this purpose, or they were way too complex. So I came up, I just did, kept looking and thinking, and I think I've got something that will work. So it's kind of different, but let's see what you guys think. Mm-hmm. So we would no longer use the term total disability, which is on the form right now that's in part of the regs. What we would say is that the licensee had a condition that substantially limited one or more life activities. So that's consistent with the ADA and California law. But in addition, we would require the licensee to demonstrate that their condition caused their earned income to drop below this substantial gainful activity amount that's set by the Social Security Administration. So that substantial gainful activity is basically if you're on Social Security, you're disabled, you're on Social Security, you can have an income, but it can't be above a certain amount because then otherwise you no longer qualify. So they set that, it increases every year, and we have to specify there's a different level. If you're blind, you can make more money, and we're not going to use the one for blind individuals. Basically, in the past, if you were blind, you could be on Social Security and have as much income. There was no limit on your income. So they did put a limit in, but they left it kind of higher. So we're proposing to use the SGA amount for non-blind individuals. And that right now, that threshold is $1,220 monthly. And again, it's adjusted every year. So eligibility would be demonstrated through, you would have a physician or psychologist verify your disability. You would submit proof of your income during the period of disability. So that's the way that we're looking at that. And then we are also, one other piece is that we would require licensees, if you're granted a CE waiver, we would still ask you to take the 6-hour law and ethics course despite the waiver, because if you get a waiver, you can still renew active. So we're proposing that. CAMPT letter, they have concerns about that, but we'll get to the CAMPT concerns momentarily. But I'd like to stop here and see what you all think about this proposal at this point.
So right now it's and, so it has to have, the disability.
Right.
And then also with the income fall under, that threshold.
Right.
Okay, just clarifying. Okay. Any other board members, questions, suggestions? Okay. Public comments. I actually think that that's a lot clearer, and I like the fact that it's consistent, with the ADA, and the California law, so that they don't have like two different, version, to go for. So,
Right.
Betty?
Problem with my mic. So when I read the CAMP letter, the thing that occurred to me, I mean, we do have to acknowledge that there are situations, but isn't it true that those licenses could be put on inactive status? And then the same would apply to people who, for example, who are out of the country, who are unable to work, or who have other events.
Right.
You go on inactive status, you can activate as soon as you've completed that requirement.
Correct.
So while I understand the concern, I'm feeling like there's probably mechanisms that would keep it from being incredibly punitive for certain people.
Right.
I don't know. That was my
My
observation.
experience with the waivers that we have currently going is that, they're still practicing. They want the waiver from the 36 hours because I'm disabled, or they have a number of different, pick the list. And, they're legit, I get it. But they're still seeing clients. And we change our laws. Yeah, and we change our laws annually, whether we propose it or somebody else proposes it.
So it seems like a very minimal requirement, that if they are still seeing clients, then requiring 6 hours of law and ethics in a 2-year period
Yeah,
seems
that you can get online.
like it should not be a huge barrier.
It shouldn't if you want to have that.
If you're still able to see clients.
Yeah,
And
if
if
you
you're not
want
able
to.
to see clients, then you go on inactive
Correct.
and done.
And then you're done. You don't have to take any CE.
So my other question is that, so it only applies to the licensees, not registrants.
Well, we're not requiring registrants right now.
So they're also a certain amount of the post license. Do we still have classes that they have to take after they got licensed?
Registrants?
Yeah,
or-
the registrants.
There are some courses, they're not CE, but.
Yes, there's some courses that they might be taking. No.
Right, but there's no waiver
Yeah,
process for that.
yeah, no, okay. Just checking. Yeah. Anne?
Ann Tran with CAMPT, and I just want to thank Christy and Kim and the committee and the board. in considering our letter, we, in terms of the 6-hour CEs and making that a requirement for those who ask for a temporary waiver, we are concerned about, if in the event, due to their particular circumstances, are unable to take the 6 CEs, could they, for the inactive license, is that, I think they can only do that at their renewal. So if something were to happen in the middle of their renewal period and they couldn't request the waiver, or if they did get a waiver but they're not working, how would that, could we figure out a way to
At the next.
allow for that? Because then, but they wouldn't be able to take their CEs.
Right. So they have
that
this.
time period.
Right, so they have the waiver for, I've got a waiver for 2 years. If in the middle of this 2 year, but I've still got to do my 6-hour CE. If I get into, let's just say a horrific accident and I'm hospitalized for 6 months, what I would do at the next renewal is check inactive.
Okay.
Inactive.
But during the waiver period,
During the
they
waiver-
still need to do the 6 hours.
You
of
should
law
still be
ethics.
able to do
Okay.
the 6 hours, but if in the middle of that waiver period, you're in that accident, then the next time the renewal comes up, I'm going to check inactive. And then probably, if I can work, I would start doing the CEs so that when I'm ready to become active again, I can submit those documents in. Yeah. Because it's not for the prior, they're getting the waiver moving forward. It's not retro,
It's where I'm sitting.
right? Am I?
Not a retro waiver, it's,
I think it is retro. They have to apply within at least 60 days before their expiration date. So it would be for the current renewal period because that's when the disability had to occur. So the 2 years, here you're expiring. So for this period right before it, that 1 year of being disabled.
Oh.
So you're saying you couldn't do it during that time. So yeah, it is kind of.
Kind of a retro?
Yeah.
so that's just our concern, is during that time, they're not able to. And I understand, if they're working, if they're able to work, I understand the need for law and ethics continuing education and other continuing education, but just during that time, for the need for the waiver, it's retroactively applied. So during that time, if they have a hard time due to their health circumstances or a family member or loved ones, then that might be something for the board committee to consider.
I didn't,
Yeah, it's because
my blood sugar must have really dropped. I thought that you were applying for the waiver moving forward, not
well,
retro.
it's stating that when you apply for the waiver, you're saying that you want a waiver from having completed those 36
Previously, okay.
hours for the and what I mean that usually so it is, I guess, yeah, retro.
That's retro.
But,
I've been doing this too long.
but yeah, that's the situation though. If you can't work, then it's usually the inactive is what you do. If you can't make that or the waiver for some reason you didn't file a waiver timely, then the inactive renewal would be the way
Right,
to
and
go.
so
That's
the
what I would
next-
do.
Right, the action would be the renewal, the inactive.
The inactive,
renewal, right.
And then hurry, scurry, get your CE if you want to go active in that subsequent.
And that's the way we operate now. I mean, we've had many conversations with people, and it's.
But the waiver right now does allow for all 36.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, okay. I
the-
see what you're saying with the 6
Yeah,
hours.
the
Yeah.
6-hour law and ethics requirement is my understanding, is a new,
Would
it's an
be.
addition. You would exempt 30, and then 6 you would have to do law and ethics still. So
Betty, go ahead.
So I want to clarify this because so scenario, they've got a waiver. They plan on doing law and ethics. They're still working. They get worse. They stop being able to work. Things go bad. But it's not their license isn't up for another, say, 3 months, 4 months. If when that license renewal comes up, they ask to go on inactive status because now they're no longer able to work, they were unable to take the exam. My question is, does that hold them harmless, or are they subject to like a fine, or if they get that would be my issue is
With
I
the
think that's
6
what
hour
you're
they would.
asking too is
because the inactives, you can elect to go inactive going forward.
yeah.
Right.
So you can plan, okay, well, I'm going to go inactive. I don't need to do the 36 until I go active again.
Right.
It's just during that time of need or hardship, you can't take
So you can't
CEs.
mid-cycle say, I want to put my license on inactive because I'm not able to work, I'm not able to do
Right.
anything. But as that renewal cycle comes up, they could technically still be held responsible if there's an audit. Did they do their 6 hours?
6 hours.
But they were basically inactive and not working. So I think that's the loophole that you're possibly concerned about.
Concern about, the undue burden on some of these individuals who really do have a hardship. I mean, they just, either for themselves or for others, for their loved ones, and it's, there's a reason why you, and it's only under very limited circumstances that you're giving this temporary waiver. It's, and so we think it could cause an undue burden, and if they're not able to do it, and you audit, they'll get fined.
Okay.
So, thank you.
So, so also, the 6 hours law and ethics class, I think the availability is, is certainly, I mean, you can get it fairly reasonably, price-wise and stuff. So it might be, I'm just thinking about, meeting that requirement. So, so I think, if it's a mandated in-person class, and that's different. But I think, given it's only 6 hours, I think it's kind of like, it's a loophole, but, is it very, I think it's pretty doable too. Yeah. So, but thanks for, pointing that out. So yeah.
Just wanted to add, I think it is doable, I do agree, because now that it's all online, we can go online and take the course. I think sometimes people go, when you're going through a difficult time, you're not really thinking about these additional, and continuing education. Okay, do I need to do, I don't need to do 36, I need to do 6 law and ethics. It's just, you're really not thinking about these things.
So will that be an education issue also? Because if that's just a reminder, that, because I do believe that, the application for for that is very few. And so, if we can actually, send out material and just say, yes,
Right.
your request was approved, and, and please remind it that, this is your requirement.
Right, and what in the form instructions, I actually put like at the very top of the instructions, like the second bullet point is that you'll have to do the 6-hour course. It cannot be waived. So that, yeah, it would be like they would know right as they're applying, they have to apply 60 days before their expiration date. So that would give them a little time to, to do that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Something like that on the web.
Right,
I think
so
it's about
So if the
education.
committee recommends this, we would just do more education, would request more education on this and make it very clear.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. So I think we're good, right? There's no change.
Right.
There's no change to the
Yes.
language and stuff?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly, yeah. So
And
let's
so we can
continue.
move forward.
Yeah, so we'll continue on with the letter from CAMPT. So one of the things that they were asked us to consider is consider allowing something called micro-learning. Right now, our CE courses have to be 1 hour minimum in length. And CAMPT sent us some research about that micro-learning, which could be as short as 15 minutes, could be effective, and they feel that there is a need for greater flexibility in how courses are taught. So I did provide a copy of the research that they submitted, so some possible discussion on that point here. Should we consider shortening CE courses to allow them to be 15 minutes in length?
So that would be 0.25 CEUs.
Right.
So if some licensees, registrants, miscalculate, that how many increments of that 0.25 and then short of 0.25, then there is always a chance that they might be subject to, citation, if they got audited, right? So, I mean, I get it. I'm just throwing out the real scenario out there too. Betty.
So when I read that, I thought, yeah, absolutely. There's lots of application for microlearning, lots of application. I don't know that we need to revise our practice in this particular instance to accommodate that level of micro-learning. Not that it's not a valid, I mean, I'm an educator, I get it. Micro-learning has lots of value in different niches. And the part of the reason I say that is because I just look at the staff, the complexity of trying to track those CEs to begin with, and adding that additional level of 0.10, 0.15, 0.20. I think that the increased staff demands on trying to track that kind of thing and communicating it clearly to the stakeholders, I think is perhaps impractical in this context. Not that we don't recognize microlearning, but there may need to be just for practicality purposes, it probably isn't a good application in this case.
So we don't approve classes anymore, or we don't provide, a approved provider anymore. So we basically just, are letting the approval agency know that, whether the 0.25 is acceptable or not.
Well, we do still have in our regulations some requirements for courses. So the regs do say 1 hour
1 hour.
length.
And that's consistent across all the professions as
Right.
well. I mean, this would be, the validity of it, I understand, agree, et cetera, but we would have to change that portion of our statute to say 1 hour of, a CE unit is equal to,
Right.
so,
So, so learning-wise, it's beneficial, but, language-wise, it's making it very, it's kind of difficult.
it's a
Yeah.
big deviation, and then, when we're doing the audit, it's going to take four certificates to equal that 1 hour. So now you're having increased paper to look at, and what if there's a miscalculation, and it's just,
I think, the suggestion really would be, for the association to maybe approve 4 little modules, and then so that equal 1 unit. And, I think the 1 certificate for 1 hour. So I think, it's not really about changing the law, but maybe it's really encouraging the association, for those who, apply for, provide the CEU, to really just kind of look at, how to monitor, the classes so that, it can promote that efficient learning. So I think it's not necessarily on the board, the behalf to, to change that. I think it's like one, if it's consistent across board, I think technically it make it difficult.
I think you're right. I think under the law, you could do 4 modules that equal 1 hour. It doesn't necessarily, it says a course shall be 1 hour in length. So I don't even know that they have to be exactly on the same topic. You know what I mean? Like you could have some people purchase a course that covers, that's offered in 15-minute modules. Or even shorter. I mean, depending. So I think there is some flexibility there.
Right. But I think, really, it's I think it can be done in the other end instead of in our end.
Antran with Count. Thank you. So if we can clarify that the 1 hour, I think the way we read it was it's got to be a course that's got to be at least 60 minutes to count. So if you're flexible in terms of it being, 30 minutes and 30 minutes, that would count. I think that would be helpful.
I could see having a certificate that said a total number of 1 hour CEUs awarded, and then breaking it down to 30 minutes in course A, 30 minutes in course B, because you're still awarding the same, you're just demonstrating how it was obtained.
Right. Okay.
So.
Great. Okay. Thank
As
you.
long- Yeah, I'm good with that.
Nice. Very nice.
I mean, I only look at totals anyways.
Exactly. Right. So, okay, but that's a good dialogue too, so that you can, the association know, how to, put the standards up there, for the instructors.
For
Good.
sure. Okay.
So, Christy?
So the next would be, not to be confused with our discussion on law and ethics for CE waivers. This is different, but we're talking a law and ethics course again. So right now, if you're a supervisor, you have to have 6 hours of supervision training every 2 years. And then if you're a licensee, you have to do 6 hours of law and ethics every 2 years. So we get asked the question a lot, if I take a course on law and ethics that's tailored for supervisors, can that meet both of the requirements? And so they just want some clarification on that. So I talked to our staff. We do tell people that it could count for both right now, but that they still, it doesn't mean they can just do 6 hours. They still have to meet 6 and 6. What it does is allows them to take a different topic for their CE. So it's not that they would go back and forth. It's not that we're saying a regular law and ethics course could meet your supervisor training. It has to be tailored to supervisors. So CAMP asked for clarification. I asked staff how we do it, and that is how we do it. But we kind of have some concerns internally about, is that appropriate? So would like to.
So what
open that
they're
for discussion.
asking is the double counting. Take one class and then fulfill 2 requirements.
Right.
And so
Right.
when we come back to the principle, to the principle, why do we require law and ethics and why do we require clinical supervision classes, right? And so I think even though to me, it's like even though it's a law and ethics designed for supervisor, it doesn't equate that clinical supervision component. It's broader than that. And so, so right now the proposal is, continue to have that 6 hours requirement for law and ethics and then the 6 hours for the supervisor training, and they cannot be double counted.
I think one way or the other, we're going to have to clarify the law, like is it or isn't it? Because right now it isn't addressed in law, but then we have the staff interpretation, and that's what happens when the law isn't super clear. We have to figure it out, and sometimes that's been 10 years ago that determination was made, and we're not, so it's. It would be nice to clarify it one way or the other, and that's basically what CAMP is asking. They're not advocating for it one way or the other. They're
But it's
asking
about
for
clarification.
Yeah,
clarifying.
yeah.
And considering what we've done with supervision requirements lately, is it appropriate
Right.
to let them use one class for both?
So, so that's one of the things that I check once every other year, for my renewal. And so like I said, I think, the clinical supervision, the 6 hours encompasses a lot more than just the law and ethics. So to me, I don't think that it should be double counted. I think law and ethics is law and ethics, talking about all these laws and regulations and, an ethical practice. And then supervision is really another one. And especially for those supervisors that, we're really requiring them, to have a huge responsibility. And I think, just making sure that they meet their CE requirement, they're up to date, with their education, I think it's important. And so, and it is 36 hours, even though they double count, they still have to take something else. So if they, we're very clear that we cannot double count it. It has to be law and ethics or supervision. So I think that would, honor, what the board's idea for the consumer protection and also protecting the quality of supervisor and the quality for the registrants, supervision they receive. That's my take. Board members? It's okay? Hi. Any other? Anne? Want to make you happy.
And with CAMP, thank you. We just, like Christy said, we're not advocating one way or the other. I think right now, after discussing with VBS staff, we are advising our members that it is not to be double counted. So we are doing, or we're letting members know that it's 6 hours of law and ethics and then 6 hours of supervision. And if you're doing supervision, law and ethics, it doesn't count for both. So what we would like is clarification in the law, because we do get that question and there's a lot of confusion. So just clarity would be appreciated. Thank you.
So in that sense, so Christy, do you, any of the language that needs to change in the?
Yeah, there would be a minor, there would need to be a language change. I didn't do anything with this yet until we discussed it. So yeah.
So that would require some, language changes.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So want to move on?
Okay.
Yeah.
So the next would be clarification of course content requirements. So currently courses have to be based upon, and this is a quote, methodological, theoretical, research, or practice knowledge base. So CAMP says that their CE providers that they regulate often struggle to understand what this means. So this language came from if you remember when we retooled our entire CE program, because we had some inappropriate courses, such as the one on the sexual orientation change therapy. So we were trying to bring it back to science-based, or something along those lines. And so we've proposed some clarifying language, and that is on,
173.
thank you. And so what we would instead say is that it's relevant to the profession's scope of practice, it is supported by evidence-based practice, it is consistent with the profession's current standards of care, and that it's consistent with the profession's ethical, legal, statutory, and regulatory standards, and it does one or both of the following. Demonstrates credibility through support from mental health practices, current educational standards, and current research, or is directly related to the profession's ethical, legal, statutory, or regulatory standards.
That is really beautiful.
I had help with that, so I can't take Betty helped, Leah helped me with that, so yeah.
Yeah, that is really, really clean, and it's very consistent with the languages that we see in the out-of-state law, and that's really good. So, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other comments? Board member, public, like the language? Anne?
Ann Tran with CAMP, thank you. We think that really helps clarify what the whole sentence meant, so
Okay,
I think it would be good. Yeah, so are we going to look over these proposed changes again, or is it going to?
It'll be to the board.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah, we're making recommendations right now, and one layer of getting feedback, and you will see it again in the next board meeting.
So the
Okay.
next thing that they're suggesting is that they're suggesting streamlining, it's that next section on page 173, if you look at subdivision C. This is really the main thing that we would lose by, let's see. So the changes here are really, at this point, are not substantive, except for the one thing I didn't do that Camp was asking is, they're asking us to take out the word measurable as it pertains to educational goals and specific learning objectives. So under C1, that word measurable is something that they're requesting us to remove. So we needed to discuss that piece. I'm not sure why, I don't think there was a rationale explained for that.
So my guess is on measurable, you outline your learning objectives. At the end of the course, the attendee will understand this, become familiar with that, have knowledge of. To me, those are the measurables. So I'm not sure, I'm with you, I'm not sure what the concern was.
So Anne, maybe you will be, maybe you can explain a little bit why why the proposal.
So I think putting measurable in is fine. I think what the intent with our revisions was to streamline it. When you were
Okay.
looking at the old language, it kind of had redundant language.
Yes.
And so leaving in measurables is, I'm not sure why we took that out, but I think that's fine. And we like the proposed changes. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So no change is okay. All right. So, okay. And right now, the language is just remain as it is. If we have to take it out, then we have to take it out.
Right,
Okay, so
exactly.
no
Okay.
change. Okay.
Okay, and then they've asked us to retain a couple of sections that we were going to delete because they were transitional language, or they applied to the board's old program of where we approve CE providers. So the first one they've asked us to retain is on the required content for course advertisements. They would like to make that applicable to any CE provider. They're feeling that they get calls from licensees frequently where they have difficulty determining whether a course is being offered by a approved provider, and they feel that this would help. But our concern in doing that would be that because the approval agencies are now responsible for setting those standards, that's why we're proposing, we don't have a hand in that anymore.
Right.
and we couldn't enforce it anyway. So we understand that there, it might be a little more difficult for our licensees now to figure out who is an acceptable provider, but we could work on maybe doing some more, maybe bump up our FAQs in that area or something that we can do on our end to help people understand how to find an acceptable course.
So it also means that another thing is about public, the outreach and the education part. How do we, help the registrant and the licensees to find the, right class or the, the acceptable classes to take.
Right.
Yeah. And so, so currently, the proposal is to take it out.
Right.
And so now the request is to keep it in.
Right.
And so, so right now we're saying that, what I'm feeling, the board members and the staff saying that, no, we should delete it. Okay.
Yeah, we feel that it should be deleted, and there's another section on course instructor qualifications, and they're asking us to do the same thing, but it's a similar issue, but I think it's different, and their concern's a little different. It's not that people are calling about this, it's more CAMP has concerns that other CE approval agencies might be allowing unqualified instructors. So I'll just leave that there, and then, we can discuss, and, if she wants to expand upon that.
So I'm feeling, board members, inclination is not to, is not to keep it and to keep it clean, delete the two sections. So, Anne, you have any feedback?
Hi, Anne with CAMP. As Chrissy said, we do get a lot of calls from our members who take CE courses from other approval agency providers, and they don't know whether or not are they approved, who are they approved by? So there's a lot of confusion. The advertisement requirements really can help. So we would strongly, recommend it. However, I understand the board wanting to step back and remove the, because you can't enforce it. I understand. Is there any way the board could maybe guidance, further guidance, educational materials that we can send out to all the approval agencies, providers? That would be very helpful.
Yeah, the common question I get is this provider okay? And for me, it's not necessarily the provider, is that provider okay with an approval agency?
Right.
So if the approval agency has blessed the provider, I'm going to take the CE. Yeah, and so, maybe that's just the message we need to start putting on the website with respect to CE.
Thank you.
Okay. So any other comments? Okay. So thanks, Christy. This is very thorough and a lot of the details, a lot of cleanup. And so it looks to me that, the only change really is about, that 1887.3C, the language that, the language that need to, about the double counting and, make sure that the two classes are
Yes,
separated.
correct.
That's the only change that we have.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So I think we're ready for a motion. So I'll make a motion, whatever the motion is. To accept, accept this legislative proposal, except that substantive change, for that. And to
It's a
recommend to the full board.
regulatory regulation proposal.
Thank you.
Yes.
And Debbie, oh my God, Deborah. And Deborah, that's your new name, it's on the record now. So Deborah supported that, the second. Any other comments? Okay, so we're ready to vote.
So for purposes of the minutes, there's a recommendation for a motion. Is that the motion you're carrying forward?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Christina Wong?
Yes.
Deborah Brown? Yes. Betty Conley? Motion carries.
Thank you. So the last but not the least item is, okay, so it's about the legislative update. Roseanne, please.
Okay. So the legislature's on summer break right now, and then they come back mid this month and have a few weeks to kind of wrap all the bills up and make some decisions of what's going to get sent to the governor. So we're kind of in the tail end of the session now. The board's sponsoring 3 proposals. All of them are moving along. SB 679, our license portability bill, has passed both policy committees of each house and is now in the Assembly Appropriations Committee. If it passes there, it will go on to the governor. AB 630 is almost to the governor. It's on 3rd reading in the Senate. That's our required notice to consumers bill. And then the omnibus bill, that bill is also moving along. One item was rejected for the omnibus bill. I went over that at the last minute, and it would have added a petition to revoke probation as the reason the board could deny exam admission or refuse to issue a license. And so that was considered too substantive. So we will reevaluate that, see if it's something that can be considered next year, or we'll have to figure out what we can do, what can be done, if anything, on that one. CalPICS bill, AB 769, is still going and is in the Senate Appropriations Committee. AB 1651, the CASP bill about the LEP supervision of associates and trainees is moving along, and is on 3rd reading in the Senate. A lot of the other bills the boards took positions on have been amended, some of them substantially, so we kind of lost a lot of our positions, and unfortunately the board's not going to meet again by the time some of them are going to be enrolled. So some of them have kind of just moved along and evolved into slightly different ways, but yeah, that's pretty much the legislation, and we'll have a full update at the September meeting.
More to come.
Yes.
Okay. So I think the next one is the rulemaking proposal updates. And
Yes.
it's Christie.
Okay, great. So we have the AB 2138 regs, and it has, Roseanne informed me, has just been noticed to the public, or it's been submitted for notice to the public, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just took it down to OAL yesterday. So the hearing for the public comment period will begin on the 16th of August. And then the public hearing will be at 10 a.m. in the El Dorado room on September 30th, 2019. The El Dorado room is the room right upstairs. The notice will be mailed and announced via listserv soon.
Okay, and then.
I'm so glad at least one thing is moving along.
Yeah, we're getting some movement. Our regs on the enforcement process are on hold until the 2138 regs are complete, because they're tied to each other. Our reg package on exam rescoring, application abandonment, and the APCC fee has been submitted to OAL for final approval. So that one's moving along. That was submitted July 22nd. So that's in the very final stage. So yay. And then our supervision regs was submitted to DCA for initial review on April 18th, and I think it's pretty close to being moved through legal, so now it has to go through budgets and exec or agency. So I think it's done in legal. Okay, so yeah, that's moving as well. So and that's it.
That's really good. Yeah. So at least some good news. All the hard work, discussion, and finally it's moving forward.
Yes, for sure.
Wonderful. And thank you, Christy.
And this just so you know, the supervision regs will have to go back to the board for some small language tweaks, which we're anticipating, but we're not anticipating that extending the length of time it's going to take to get it passed. It will just take, anyway, because it won't have to go back through the initial review process at this point.
Which is good. We just keep going, and then, up for the board to approve those minor changes.
Exactly.
So we will hear it again in September.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So the next agenda item is public comments for items not on the agenda. Okay? All right. And then the last one is suggestion for future agenda items. Any suggestions? No, I don't think so. Apart from just, setting up the subcommittee, to do that, to discuss the whole thing. And that's, at the pleasure of our chair right there, our board chair, Betty. Yeah. All righty. Well, in that sense, hearing none, then, then we can safely adjourn the meeting. The time now is 12:33, and thank you very much for coming to the meeting. Have a wonderful day.